Calling the Fraser City Council Special Work Session meeting of Thursday, January 9th, 2024 to order at 6:30 p.m. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Ms. Greenia, can we please have a roll call of council members?
Councilmember Bransky.
Present.
Mayor Lessig.
Yes.
Councilmember Odell.
Yes.
Councilmember Perry.
Here.
Councilmember Shornack. Councilmember Stein.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Sutherland.
Present.
Okay, I would like to make a motion to excuse Councilmember Shornack.
Second.
All right, motion to excuse Councilmember Shornack, seconded by Sutherland. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Motion passes. Members excused. Thank you. Item number 4, approval of the agenda. I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda. Councilmember Odell.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the agenda as submitted.
I'll second.
Okay, motion by Odell, second by Stein. I'm sorry. I got a little cold. To approve the agenda of January 9th, 2024. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Agenda is approved. Item 5A, council workshop, council manager roles. And I don't know who is taking that on first.
So tonight, we have before us the agenda for the special work session, and what we're going to be focusing on today is just kind of some of the general rules, guidelines for how council and management work together, and how this whole group of people and how we operate together and what we get done. So first of all, we're going to be starting with talking about council manager rules. After that, we'll move into council rules and procedures, parliamentary procedure and council decorum, and then finally, the budgetary process.
Okay. Who would like to start with council manager roles? Would that be you, Mr.
Sure.
Alt?
Mr. Mayor, I'd be happy to. Cindy was reminding me that 2 years ago, when we did this kind of an orientation meeting, we did it at the Senior Activity Center, and I really liked the format where it was sort of informal. Feel free to interrupt, raise questions, things that are on your mind. I tried to change it up a little bit, based on how it went last time. And as you can see in front of you, you each have a page for each subject. So it's got some room at the bottom, hopefully for some notes or questions if you have any as we're going through things. Notes of things you learned that you want to add to it. And the difference in this format this time around is I added something called food for thought, just things that came to my mind as I was thinking through what we did last time, and certainly lessons of experience from my work. So to begin, we have 4 items. If anybody, Mr. Mayor, anybody needs a break as we move along, I think we took a break around halftime the last time we did this, so just interrupt me or stop me if I'm going too fast or getting into too much. But I'll start us off, and obviously it's a collaborative thing. We have Elaine and Cindy here as well, who can certainly jump in and add to anything that I'm talking about if I'm talking out of school, because obviously they do this, and I just observe and assist and support them. So with that, all of you or most of you are familiar with the concept from high school of sort of a strong mayor, weak mayor form of government. The City of Fraser was formed as a weak mayor form of government. That isn't a term that's meant to be derogatory toward the mayor of Fraser. It's just meant to be how we're set up to do business. It's similar in Sterling Heights and many other communities where the mayor is more the ceremonial figurehead of the city. It's the person who runs the meeting. It's the chairperson. It's the person who guides the ship. It's the face, so to speak, of the council. I often wonder sometimes, if it wouldn't be easier to just have the title of chairperson or presiding officer, because once you get that title, right, of mayor, everybody thinks you're in charge. So as I'm sure Mr. Lessig will attest and others before him, the first person they will call is usually the one in the middle, And all of you are kind of, whew, I dodged that one, right? Because I'm in the background. I don't have that one on my nameplate. So, but it is a weak mayor form of government, again, not in a bad way. And what that really means is that the mayor is just a member of council like all of you. The mayor has one vote, just like all of you. The mayor speaks only through the voice of the council, just like all of you speak through the voice of the council. If the council 4-3, 5-2, 6-1, or 7-0 rules or decides something, the expectation is that each of you will express that is the will of the council. You can certainly express your own opinion, right? If you're unhappy with the will of the council or disagree with the will of council, that's why we have 7 people and not 1. But at the same time, the expectation, the fiduciary duty, if you will, is that everybody here will serve the will of the council and do your best to implement that will, even if you disagree with it, right? You can certainly, politic to change it. You can certainly advocate for changing it. You can certainly try to convince your peers why it might be incorrect or why you believe differently or of something they didn't know any better about. But at the end of the day, the will of the council is by majority, typically by 4, although if you have a few absences, it can be 3-2 in some cases, depending on the specific issue. And we'll talk about a little bit of that. 5
for appropriation.
Correct. I was going to say, there's a couple of issues that are specific to, have specific vote totals. Vacation of roads is another one. There's some unique ones in there too, where it takes 5. And you don't see that every day, but it's in there. And we'll get to that, I think, on page 2 or 3.
Okay.
The city was originally established without a city manager. That was very common back in the time frames that we're talking about when cities were starting to become cities and not townships or villages anymore. And then as they started to get bigger or started to move forward as cities, the local city council people realized we don't get paid to run this place, so it's probably a good idea to hire a professional to run the place. And so in 1966, we created by ordinance the position of city manager. And I don't know if we have a record of all the city managers that have come before, but that's a long time and a lot of different administrations that have come and gone. And by ordinance, the city manager hires, suspends, and fires pretty much every employee you see at the city level other than the administrative officers of the city. And I've listed those for you here. That's the city clerk, city treasurer, city assessor, city attorney, chief of police, and fire chief, which, as you know, we've combined those last 2 into a public safety department director, which is perfectly allowed under the charter and city code and state law. Beyond that, I was just talking in the back room a little bit. I have another community was asking the question recently, can the city manager hire somebody and create a position for that somebody that isn't technically or hasn't technically been approved by the council? So I was talking with my colleague just today about it, actually, at the office, and we were kind of playing the devil's advocate thing that we do. We bounce it around, back and forth. What about this? What about this? What do you think of this? What's the pushback on this? And it's kind of timely for tonight because it really illuminates what the city manager's role is. The city manager is the administrative officer of the city. That person is the CEO. That person is the one who executes the policy, who executes the budget, and who executes all of the day-to-day operations of the city. Everybody below that title on the hierarchy chart, on the organizational chart, they all flow through the city manager, who flows up and to all of you as a whole, as a city council. City council sets policy, city council holds the purse strings, as they say, sets the finances, sets the budget, sets the appropriations and allocations of money. But at the end of the day, once you've done that, unless you've also created other policies or restrictions or rules, and we have some, and I'll go through some of those later, but if you haven't, then the city manager is the administrative officer. The city manager takes what's been given by virtue of budget, by virtue of policy, and executes that to the best of his or her ability. And obviously answers to the city council as a whole, should the city council have an objection to something. Yes?
DPW superintendent?
Yes.
Is that a council hire or, because we've done that in the past?
Yeah, we have. And it's not on here because it's not in the charter, but I think by ordinance it was created to be a city council appointment, yes.
And then we've also done that with the assistant DPW.
I don't know if that's the case, but I remember that.
We have done that a long time ago with
Well, finance director would be under treasurer here, so
okay.
that's the
Thank you.
name change over the years. Yeah, I believe you're right about that. That's probably by ordinance. I was just listing the ones that are in the charter, so I didn't get into the actual ordinances. There may even be something for recreation director too, but I can't remember now. Okay. So good observation. So the debate we had was, can the city manager, and this is just an anecdote more than it is on your agenda, can the city manager create a position for and hire somebody so long as the department within which that person will work has the budgeted funds to do so, to pay that person? And we came to the conclusion, the answer to that is yes. That's what the city manager's role is. It's to administer the city. And if the city manager determines that that department needs a position, and in this case, the city manager went to the union and said, I kind of think we need this. We're going to have this other position coming in when this person is qualified, but she's a great person. We want to hire her. We don't want to lose her to another community or another job, but she needs a couple more months to get her master's degree in place so she qualifies for the actual position that she's going to fill. Rather than lose her, can I create this sub-position with a different name, and it'll be a temporary position. It won't last forever. It'll expire when she transitions to the real position. And we have the budgeted funds for that department to operate. Union, are you comfortable with me doing that? And the union signed a letter of understanding saying, yes, we're good with that. So city manager did it. But obviously the question was, for us as legal, is that okay? And as I said earlier, we talked about it today, just in fact, and we concluded, yes, it is, because that is the city manager's role. The city manager, by creating a temporary position to fill a need, as long as there's budgeted funds for it, because you don't want to have to go back to city council and ask for budgetary amendments and not pay the person until you get there. But as long as there's budgeted funds for that department to operate, then having that person in a new named position is within their function.
Can I interject a little bit
Of course,
here?
yeah, of course. Oh, you're going to need your mic, though.
So one of the things that's a little bit different, so he's giving an example of something that is a case in another community. One of the things that's a little bit different right here now is that any type of position change that we have comes to council for consideration. The only,
Based on a
Long-term.
vote by council to do that.
Yes.
correct. The only exceptions that we have right now is that we have minimum numbers for public safety officers, and we are allowed to backfill to hire part-time DPW. I believe those are the only exceptions that we have currently.
Right.
And anything else, if we have to refill a position, anything like that, it would be coming to you guys for consideration. At some point in time, with HR in place and kind of getting our, getting everything kind of together from a staffing perspective and really doing a deep dive into how many people, what do we need, it might be something where maybe in the future, we're a little more comfortable saying, okay, for this budget year, we're good with this staffing level for, like, say, the finance department. Anything happens over this year, just refill it. And then it might be something I would certainly recommend reassessing from an HR perspective in the future.
So that's a very important interjection from Elaine, because my analogy, my example is in a community that doesn't have a council vote or a council resolution on how we want to handle positions, how we want to handle expansion or hires. Obviously here we have created those guidelines, those parameters for the city manager to follow, and that's what she's reciting to you now, is that she couldn't just, because of that vote, she couldn't just go out and create a new position and hire and not tell you about it, right? Because that would not go well with, in fly in the face of council's will in terms of policy, right? And that's what we're talking about. So when council sets policy, when council sets the direction, when council sets the vision, it's the city manager's task, charge, obligation to execute that to the best of their ability. And if there are restrictions on that, then that city manager has to either come to you for permission to work within those restrictions, or if it's an emergency, obviously the city manager will get it done and then come to you for an after-the-fact approval if it's a true emergency under the emergency management types of laws and ordinances that we have in place. The city manager, as you can see on the bullet points, directs and supervises the administration of all departments, offices, and agencies unless the charter or ordinance provide otherwise. What that generally means in plain English is city manager is the boss. So even though there are positions that are appointed by city council, the city manager at the end of the day that's where the buck stops, right? At the top of the chain, the organizational hierarchy. So whether it's a DPW director or the public safety director, at the end of the day, if the public safety director, as a good example, is absent from the city or unavailable, city manager is the boss. not the next person necessarily in line. That person may have the public safety director's blessing to run the place, make sure things are going well. But should anything need to go above that person's title at the captain level or wherever they're at, only the city manager could be the one to do that. There is no other position that could stand in and get that done. So when we talk about supervising and administration, obviously that also means that those people answer to the city manager. That's their working understanding. That's what they come in knowing. That's what the expectation is. And there have been times, I think, in years past when, because we're a small town, it's very easy as city council people to befriend everybody who works here. It's very easy to get to know them on a personal level. It's very easy to have already known them on a personal level before even becoming a council person, or maybe before they started working here. That line can get a little bit uncomfortable for employees, because at the end of the day, they know this is their boss, but they never want to let any of you down, because you are their citizen bosses, right? You are their overseers. You are their community members who are kind of here to watch, to observe, to budget, to grant requests for things that they may need. So they never want to let you down. And it creates a pressure, I think, for them whenever they feel that they are being asked something from any of you. So it's not really a legal concern as much as it is an organizational concern or operational concern. But if it does have any legal component to it, and as part of my presentation tonight, I would say to you it's this. If we were ever in a weird position where they had to choose between answering to one of you or answering to her, they have to answer to her. And we never want to put them in that position. So I help out with another community. It's a downriver community that last year the mayor was very concerned that someone was going, that a council person or I don't remember if it was a council person or a board member, was going to the city clerk and closing the door and talking about whatever they were talking about. And it was very disturbing and concerning. The mayor in that community is a strong mayor. So it's a full-time job. There is no city manager. That's the person who is the city CEO, that mayor. So that's just another anecdote or example of the discomfort it can sometimes cause, because all of you are very comfortable, right? I've known this person, or I'm getting to know you, and hey, could you do me a favor? And there are rumors and legends in this city that I've never confirmed of city council people asking somebody in an important position to maybe put a little extra concrete on their driveway or put a little asphalt here somewhere. And I never want to know that that's true, because that wouldn't be okay. And that's what I mean by the pressure of not wanting to let you down, right? At some point, especially in a smaller community, but even in a bigger one, there's a certain, what's the harm? I'm going to help this council person out. What's the harm? What's the harm, right?
So,
Rationalization of it.
Can I stop you and ask a question?
Of
then?
course, yeah.
So I had something happen recently where, I never want to overstep, right? And I would never want to put anyone in that position. But because we are a small town, and people do, right, know who we are. Like, I had a huge pothole at the end of my driveway. Like, my car was going ka-chunk, and I was like any other resident, I'm just going to call DPW and just ask. Man, they were on it. Hunter knows who I am, and so it's like, even if you do take the right process, still might get preferential treatment, which makes it weird for me, right? So I actually avoided calling DPW for a really long time because I didn't want it to appear that I was asking for any kind of favor. So in that scenario, right, where you are handling it through the right channels, but you still, it still may be observed preferential,
Yes.
then what?
You hit the nail on the head, right? There's always going to be that perception that your position mattered more, right? It happens to me, it happens to her. It's going to happen to a police officer, right? It happens to all of us.
Ask your neighbor to do it.
There's that perception. So that's at the end of the day, though, you all have, and we'll talk a little bit about fiduciary duties, we'll talk a little bit about ethical obligations. You all have a duty to know or sort of be conscious of where the line is. Asking as a resident to get the garbage picked up or the leaves or the, whatever it is, the pothole patched on your street, yes, they know who you are, right? You can't help that. You shouldn't have to hide from that or be shamed by that or somehow make someone else do it for you. But the flip side of that is, I'll tell you just a short story. So a judge, who I'm not going to get into any details, so you can't figure out who it is, but a judge not too long ago asked me about a fence issue behind this judge's house. And the fence abuts like an apartment complex or an apartment facility, and it's well behind the house, and there's a tree there, and there's an issue with the tree and interfering with the fence. And the judge made it clear that because of the judge's name and the fact that the judge may have to hear cases that involve that place or people that live there, the judge said, I made my spouse do it. Right? I made my spouse make the call because they have a different last name. So just an example of sometimes just thinking about what people will think or how it might impact them, even more so than you, is certainly step one. And then I think step two is figuring out that line, right? Am I asking as a resident because it's something that needs to be fixed? If I am, I can't help the fact that I happen to be a city council person or a zoning board member or somebody that they know. But if I'm asking as a council person because I want something changed or I want to implement or do something important in the city, you got to kind of balance where that line is. And if you're ever not sure, if you're ever worried that it's some kind of breach of your fiduciary duties, you can ask me, you can ask Elaine, or you can just run it through her because you're just on the fence. Like, I want to get this pothole fixed, but I don't want to look like I'm getting preferential treatment for getting it fixed, so I'll just go through her. Then you're done, right? Then it's like she's got a council person complaint as a resident. She's going to get it done. She's going to make sure DPW handles it. So, and if she doesn't, that's on her, right? At that point, it's no longer on you, and it no longer puts DPW in that awkward spot of, I want to help that council person, I want to get that done, but I got 50 other things in the way. Do I back up those other people because I'm going to make sure that you can see the awkwardness of it, right? That's kind of full circle to where I started. That being said, obviously the department heads, I've dealt with this in other communities too. They're still, at the end of the day, accountable to the residents too, not just their boss. So they are here and available and at the disposal of all of you like any other resident, preferably in the same capacity, which is to express thank yous or to express complaints or to express that, something needs to be done, if, would you mind putting it on the list? But for the most part, if it's something bigger than a resident thing, it should really be going through the city manager so that there is no confusion. Not only that, it gives the city manager the ability to monitor, right? Because at the end of the day, the city manager has to make sure things are getting done. If it's going off through side channels, she has no clue that it's even been asked. So then, when the responsibility falls on her shoulders for it not getting done, she's got, unfortunately, plausible deniability, right? I didn't even know it was asked, right? Which is a good thing, but it's not. It's not a good thing because, every city manager wants to make sure whatever it is gets done. And if they don't know about it, it can't get done.
So I had one anecdote was, right after I got elected, somebody said that I had somehow gotten to DPW and had them replace Fairview, which was disintegrating into sand and gravel. And
You got that power? That's awesome.
wow.
I'm glad you won.
That was,
Been trying for years.
the thing was, I didn't get elected till 2015, and the road was replaced in 2014, thanks to the work of a council person who came out and looked at it, didn't live in the neighborhood, and made that, and advocated for it, but it wasn't because of where I lived. It was because the street was, we were shoveling the gravel off of our grass. And the second thing is, what you're saying, and to bottom line it is, we should never call DPW or anybody else and say, I need you to go do that. It's, you call Elaine, address the problem through channels.
Absolutely. I mean, that's really the bottom line, plain English. I was being delicate with it, but you just summed it up. I mean, it's, at the end of the day, don't boss an employee because they will do your bidding. And not because it's the right thing to do, but because they feel, an obligation to you. And they don't want to let you down. So best to run it always through channels, unless, to Dana's point, it's a resident concern for the whole neighborhood, and you're just asking because it's been there forever, and you're just asking, right?
Yeah. And the one other thing is that it does not make for good council relations if one person is out there asking for a favor. We had that happen early, several years ago, and it did create quite a kerfuffle, this dust storm. And it wasn't good, and I still remember exactly what happened and what day it was. So I don't want that to happen.
Yeah.
I don't want to put you guys in a position of having to arbitrate that either. So
Yeah, That's the hardest thing, I think, is it puts the administration in a weird spot, and it puts the person who's being asked to do something in a very difficult place. And it's never about, you guys, it's never about you guys doing anything wrong by asking. It's really about how uncomfortable it is when you think about the chain of command and you think about the operational paradigms, from your seats, and even from my seat, really. I mean, I'm not here every day. I'm not here every week. So from your seats and mine, we don't really understand sort of the energy, sort of the heartbeat of the operations day to day in each building that we have. That kind of interference, interruption, whatever word is right, it just probably changes the energy a bit, and until it rights itself. So worthy of thought, and kind of why I go through it on here, just to make sure that you learn from sort of anecdotes of the past, you learn from each other, and you have a general compass to guide how you make decisions in terms of who to ask things of. Some in years past, not necessarily here, but I have dealt with some who get elected and feel like that is a key, right? It's like a key to unlock every door and every file cabinet and it's not. It really isn't. And and there's, not to say that there should ever anything should ever be hidden from our elected council, but at the same time, it's not carte blanche to just take over, right? We have a process. So.
I forget if we made a rule, I can't remember, but I know in the past, the city manager had asked that if we were going to communicate as a council member with a department head, for whatever reason, that we included her in on the correspondence. And it was really more so that she was aware, so she could better not to control us, but to really make sure that her staff was doing it. So I'm assuming you want that. I don't know whether we made it a rule or not, but I've always done that sense, because it just made good sense, right?
That's my understanding too, because
Okay.
I've been told by department heads, CC her on it, make sure. So yeah, that's my
And this is-
understanding.
Yeah, and that's more so for asking questions, things
Right.
like that.
Right.
When you start kind of crossing that line and asking, can you do this for me? That's where I might, since you seeing me, be able to step in and say, this isn't really the way that things should be done. It should be brought to me, and I can check with them and, see if their list, sometimes if it's something that needs all of council to really be brought in on. So I think the system that we've had in place for that has worked out pretty well. I haven't really seen any problems with that.
And a sort of a side note to that, some people, I'm glad you brought it up, because some people might think, if I copy the city manager, it's going to look like I'm tattling, or it's going to look like I'm getting them in trouble, or it's going to look like I'm putting them on the radar. I don't think anybody sees it that way. I think they see it and they know and they understand it to mean, they understand that it means she needs to be aware of it.
Right.
That's all. Doesn't mean she's going to get involved. Just means she needs to be aware of it, because if she needs to get involved, now she's up to speed, right? She's not catching up.
And I'm going to absolutely echo that.
Microphone, or Ed's going to yell at you.
I'm going to echo that. It's always better for the city manager to know if anyone wants us to do anything.
Yeah.
She may have an answer to it right away that we have to look for, and she might just pop that off, and then you're like, okay. So it's always better if she knows. Always, always.
So, and this is not on the agenda, but as a side note, copying me is when you want it to be privileged. Keep that in mind, right? Because
Some of us are getting good at that.
we're not going to spend time on FOIA really tonight unless people want to. It's really not on the agenda, but keep in mind that the Freedom of Information Act tells us that you can withhold, you don't have to, but you can withhold things like privileged materials. Because there is a certain, despite the intent of the act, which is to make sure the public has access to how government operates and government operations and materials and records and protocols, the intent of the act understands that there are going to be times when you want to encourage frank communication, blunt communication, right? Things that if you knew it was subject to FOIA, you wouldn't be comfortable saying it. And that creates a chilling effect, they call it, on the ability to get to the point, right? You can't get to the point if you have to beat around the bush because you're afraid somebody might see it. So I'm not encouraging you to copy me on everything, but because that would be a little bit of overkill. But I do encourage you that if you feel like it's a question of a legal interpretation or something that is privileged enough then at least copying me, we can make the determination later if we have to, if the privilege really even needs to apply.
And thank you. I wanted to just because you're CC
That's
does
right.
not make it
Does
privileged.
not make it ironclad.
It does not make it a locked.
That's right.
Locked away.
That's right.
And there would be a determined, for example, if you're CC'd on this, on the council agenda with the packet, that is not a privileged document. It
is not.
You are simply being made aware of it.
Right.
So it's not a, if you're on it, it's sacred, and if you're not.
Correct.
It's something else.
But it gives us that first layer of, when the FOIA request comes in, it goes in the pile of, let's review it, right? As opposed to the pile of, it's going out right away, no questions asked. So,
Don, I got a question. So if, as your role as the city attorney, if a member of council, I'm not saying this is the case, but I'm just saying, if it ever came up, like, if we had a legal issue we were worried about, whether it was an employee, a department head, or something, doing something, can we have, as a council member, private conversations with you that are protected? If, hey, I saw this, or I heard this, is this something we need to be worried about, that type of thing? Is there some confidentiality with that versus, city manager, department head, or whoever might be involved with that conversation?
yes, qualified yes. It's going to depend on the nature of it, I suppose. You gave an example, so we'll start with that. A council person has a concern about, I don't want to bring up any sins of the past, but how about a concern about a whistleblower? Let's start there. I know it's still kind of related to the past a little bit, but trying to keep it generic. Concern about a whistleblower, right, in the city, or maybe wants to be a whistleblower. That kind of thing, I think, is privileged, and you bring it to me, but I'm always going to tell you that because you brought it to me, I probably have an obligation to look into it, and I will ask you how you want me to do that. And I think I've been pretty good at that with all, anybody that's ever asked. Do you want me to look into it further? Do you want me to submit anything through channels? Do you want me to, or do you want it to stop here and you were just looking for an educational, component, a legal education on what to do? If that's where it ends, then that's where it ends as far as I'm concerned, because it doesn't affect or involve a city privilege, it's your privilege. But if it's something bigger, or you want it to become bigger, we'll talk about that, because I'm never going to, how should I say it? I'm never going to protect something either if I feel that it's the city's interests are implicated, right? If I feel the city's interests need to be protected because of that, what we're talking about. So, I was talking with one of my colleagues earlier today. He was talking to a school counselor. And the school counselor, he said, he asked her, how do you like your job? How do you enjoy it? She said, well, I used to love it before Oxford. And now with Oxford, there is not a single student that will come to me in confidence anymore because I have to report anything disturbing that they may be going through, right? So it's that kind of thing. It's sort of if it's going to implicate something bigger, I have to talk about it with someone, probably at the city level, and I'll explore that with the council person who's concerned to see how your comfort level is, or if you want to be the one to run with the ball. But at the end of the day, if it's strictly, and I've done this quite often, I think, especially as you get used to this job, just asking me a question about, how do I do this? Or how do I accomplish this as a council person, right? How do I get something on the agenda? How do I get a closed session? Can I get a closed session? Those kinds of legal questions about policy and procedure, those are never going to leave, our talk. Those are between us as me guiding the council person, the office of city council member, rather than me guiding the city of Fraser as a whole. And I know that distinction can get, a little gray, but it was a great question, and I hopefully that answered it.
Yes.
So I think I'm already kind of hit on it, but the last bullet point there is, by charter, the council is the legislative and governing body of the city, but not the administrative branch. So you think about, high school, and we learn about how, the federal government has the administrative branch and the executive and the legislative branch and the judicial branch, right? The three branches. Cities are the same way. We have our judicial branch, which is independent. There are some obligations of the legislative branch to fund it, but for the most part, it's completely autonomous and independent. They do their own hiring. They do their own. They're kind of in charge of their own thing. I did represent, this is another anecdote, I helped represent the court in another county once, because they didn't feel like they were being given enough funding by the county commission. And that was a great piece. I mean, that was a fun legal problem. When you think about intellectual exercise, you think about the kind of things that can be enjoyable, because at the end of the day, it's not something horrible. It's just we're gonna have an intellectual fight with a judge to decide how funding should happen and how much we're entitled to and where's the line and who has the discretion. And it was great. And we ended up being heard in Port Huron. They ended up having a visiting judge jump from Wayne County over to St. Clair County or wherever we were, and had a whole big trial and lots of testimony and just, but anyway, the point I'm making is, even though the branches have to be symbiotic and have to work with each other, they are independent. So your branch is the legislative branch, the policy, the ordinances, the resolutions, the decisions on direction and visioning and planning and master planning and budgeting and appropriating and fee setting. But the administrative branch, they take it from there and they run with it. And that's how it's supposed to work in reality. And when I say they're symbiotic, it's because administrative branch relies on legislative branch to fund the things administrative branch needs to do, and legislative branch relies on administrative branch to get those things done, right? So hopefully that's a good way to look at it. Food for thought. These are new things that weren't on the last one. 2 years ago, just ideas that came to mind. We talked again about the hierarchy, the organizational chart we've already covered, I think. Communications and messaging. I think I talked a little bit already about that. You know, when you talk as a citizen, that's your hat, but people might know you now or get to know you now as a council person. So it's always very important to be careful that you don't represent that is the position of the city or the city council when you are taking a position on something. We did deal with this sort of peripherally. It wasn't a big deal, but in another community, and it had more to do with, it was a social media thing. And we came to the conclusion that it would be a best practice that if the person, as a member of council, has a comment or a position on something, to include maybe just a short disclaimer, this is just my opinion or just my position on something. It does not represent the city council or the city as a whole.
Unless a motion and a vote has been taken.
Of course.
To go in a certain direction. This is what the council did.
Yes, but that's easy, because then at that point, you're probably typing in the social media page, the city council decided to, or the motion was, or we approved, using the word we as opposed to I. So the messaging that the public gets obviously is important, because I think we've already even touched on a couple of examples here. The perception, as they say, is 9/10 of reality, but it's not always reality. And how we message, the things we message is important, and how we word them and how careful we are with how we say them will affect how the public perceives them. Whether the telephone game kicks in and they mistranslate it and they send it to the next person, they keep getting it more wrong and more wrong. Wronger is not a word. But see, that's
appropriate.
But it's appropriate, right? It's a perfect example of how it gets mistranslated, right? To a wrong word. That's at least you can go back to the original thing that you communicated, hopefully, and you messaged it correctly, and then it's not on you that they couldn't understand it or figure it out or get it right when they misinterpreted it. But the same thing, in a different way applies to how you message and communicate with employees and agents of the city, because as we started talking about, they don't want to let you down, and they feel like it's their obligation to help you. The message should be clear. Whatever your message to them is should be clear so that they don't misunderstand. They don't worry about misunderstanding. They don't have to come back in here and sit at their desk and go, what did she mean by that? What did he want from that? Right? So clear messaging, clear communications. I know those are vague concepts and broad concepts, but it's always important to take that breath before you push send or before you sit down and kind of have a script and kind of an idea of what the messaging is going to be. And then information gathering, I mentioned that it's not a key to just go through, the vault, but at the same time, city council needs to be informed. And each of you need to be informed, and each of you are in a different place in life, and in a different place in your public service where your information levels are different. Right? You know different things. You know more about something. You know nothing about something else, but the one next to you knows everything about that something else, right? So information gathering is important, whether you do it together, through each other, whether you do it through the city manager. However you do gather information, I think it's an important role that you play Much like serving on the planning commission and being informed about the cases before you hear them, right? But the zoning board, there's a variance that comes before you, taking a look at the property and understanding what it is they're really asking you for. That's the same thing, I think, in your role, is gather information. Don't be afraid to ask questions. We're going to talk about the Open Meetings Act in a little while, but information gathering is not a violation of the Open Meetings Act. You're just gathering information. You're just trying to learn and understand something. So don't be shy about that, and don't feel like you've overstepped when you need to know something that helps you do what you do.
Can I just add one more thing to that too? So then talking amongst each other, as long as it's not all of us together or four or more of us, I really feel like I'm close, is okay, right? So like if there was something happening and I wanted to call Amy and see what she thought, and then I was like, well, I want to call Sherry, like, that's okay for us
Absolutely.
to talk to each other,
Yes.
just not
Yes.
all at once.
So my job, when we get to the Open Meetings Act, is to scare the living you-know-what out of you.
You've done a good job.
That's my job. But then I can back off of that, right? I can start with scare you to death, and then I can start to slowly unpeel.
You've already been scared straight.
Unpeel the onion. Misdemeanors, felonies, fines, right? Yeah. But I can start peeling back the onion a little bit though, and I can talk about specifics like that. Like if you happen to be at the coffee shop together. Don't be afraid of each other. You can talk to each other. Even if there's 4 of you there. Hey, how's the weather? What'd you think of the game last night? You guys got any vacation plans? None of that is public policy. None of that is public deliberation or deliberating on what you do as council people. So don't be afraid of each other. Just because the Open Meetings Act says that if 4 of you are together, watch out, right? That's the scare part. It's the practical side, the common sense side of, all right, what does it mean to actually be talking about city business, right? It can get weird because if you're all at the coffee shop and there's 4 of you together, or you're at a fundraiser, or you're at an event, the Valentine's Day event, whatever you're at, and you start devolving into, hey, did you notice that redevelopment going on at 15 and such? Gets a little bit interesting if you start getting into, what do you think of that? What should we do about that? That gets a little bit different. Now you're starting to get toward that line of, we're deliberating on something we should be doing as a council. But just asking, hey, what's going in at 15 in Garfield, that's okay. It's information gathering, right? So kind of understanding that line, and we'll talk a little bit more about Open Meetings Act on the next page, I believe. But that's all I had for council manager roles, unless we have more questions.
I got one quick question about how we're currently structured. So in the past, we had an assistant city manager. You mentioned like if, let's say we don't have a department head, falls on the city manager to make those decisions, but the city manager's on vacation. Does she direct somebody to be assistant manager in her stead, or how is that currently set up?
She does, but I'll let her speak to that.
So by charter, the finance director is the assistant city manager. Right now, we're in a position where our finance director is someone relatively new. She doesn't even really have the municipal experience, so I've been leaning pretty heavily on Cindy whenever I'm out of the office on vacation, something like that. The mayor, of course, is always there as a backup for people that are trying to call and find out what's going on about something coming up on the meeting, whatever, working on the agenda, something like that. But as far as when any of these positions are empty, like when we did not have a finance director, I was the finance director, I was the one doing all that role. I mean, it's been a revolving door. You name the department head, I feel like I've been playing the role of that over the last almost 2 years. So I would say right now, when I am on vacation, which I've got a couple coming up, generally getting a hold of Cindy is a good next step. Eventually, the goal is to get that role back to Angeli as the finance director, but she probably needs to get at least a year under her belt of just being municipal city finance first before I start throwing, okay, so you need to know a little bit more about what's on the agenda and be able to help direct some questions to the right people. So that's kind of where we're at with that right now.
And since you mentioned the mayor role, if you were gone and somebody called me and asked me a question, I would go to Cindy and we'd work through it, and if I answered, it would be basically, she'd say, yep, that I'm in, what's the word, consensus or agreement with it. And I don't know if you all know, but she has a great deal of experience in government. She's been a supervisor, township supervisor, township clerk, and for some odd reason, a township trustee again. So I'd say she is a wealth of knowledge and
And a glutton for punishment.
a glutton.
A glutton for punishment.
One more thing, Don, I didn't see it here, but we are kind of the bottom rung of state government. We're not the bottom rung, there's a hierarchy, there's a governor, and then we are part of the state government, and at some level, we have to do things for them to get them to give us money, right?
Yes, you do. Here's how I'd love to describe that, and I know sometimes I get funny looks when I describe it this way. The city is the child, and the state is the parent. And another way the courts have described it is cities are arms of the state, right? The state is the body, and you're a branch on the tree. You are not co-equal. State law trumps anything you want to do because they are the parent. They make the rules. Within those rules, though, as the child, you do what's called home rule. You rule yourself and conduct yourself as a city as you wish to do, so long as you don't contravene the rules of the parent. That's a bigger, class in upper level college to talk about finance and unfunded mandates, and state wants us to do X and Y and Z, but they're not giving us any money to do it. How do they expect us to get it done, right? Well, that's the parent bossing you around and you not having the money to do it. We do have some constitutional and statutory protections for that. There have been lawsuits about unfunded mandates over the years. So there are ways that the child can fight back to get more home rule or to get more funding to do the things that the child is being told to do. But yes, I always describe it as parent-child more than arms of the tree, because we're all part of the state's government, but cities, school districts, authorities, those are all public corporations unto themselves, which is another way to remember this, because it gets confusing. The City of Fraser is a corporation. That's as clean as I can say it. You are a corporation of the state of Michigan. You're not an incorporated body. You're not, a for-profit or a nonprofit. You are a nonprofit under the IRS codes, and we could talk about that for hours. But you are at least a corporate entity. And whenever I have to file a lawsuit or something, or a contract that describes who we are, it always says City of Fraser, a Michigan municipal corporation, because that is what you are. School districts are also municipal corporations. They sometimes like to be known as general power school districts, but they really are municipal corporations too.
The library.
The library board is a public body, yes.
Yes, and an authority like Great Lakes Water Authority. All of these are corporations of the
Yes.
state.
I don't know that the library is a corporation. I'd call it a public body.
Okay.
Yeah, for Open Meetings Act purposes, FOIA, public expenditures and obligations. But yeah, authorities are another one that people don't think about too much, but, Downtown Development Authority, that kind of thing. They're basically public corporations, municipal corporations, formed under the permission of the parent to incorporate, right? And if you're not incorporated as a city, you're incorporated as a township or a village or a county, whatever the municipality is. So even airport authorities, right? All right.
Okay. Thank you.
So, moving on to page 2,
Any
unless-
questions from anybody here?
Anybody has anything else?
All right.
All right, page 2 is an update on, or a talk about council rules and procedures. This is where we start to talk now about the legislative branch and setting policy, but more in this page, it's more about setting your own procedures, how you wish to do business as a city council. The last update that we did was a partial update for some things in September of 2021, and hopefully you all have that by now. You all have a copy of that rules procedure document. It has 8 sections to it, or articles, or whatever they're called in there, with varying topics. Some just talk about the agenda and how to set it. Some talk about decorum and how to address each other. Some procedures are required by charter, so that's why they're in your rules. They're not subject to change because the charter said so. And in this page here, I give you a little bit of charter trivia, because you might wonder, and people have wondered over the years, why do we do it that way, right? So The charter says the clerk and the presiding officer, which is usually the mayor, unless the mayor's not here, then it would be the mayor pro tem, unless they're not here, must sign the journal of proceedings, is what it was called back when charters were adopted. Now it's known as the minutes. Basically just acknowledging them, not necessarily saying they're right or wrong, but just acknowledging these are the minutes of the City of Fraser meeting. A vote on all ordinances and resolutions requires a yes or a no, unless it's unanimous. So what does that mean? Well, it's basically adoption by acclamation. So if all of you are in agreement and nobody's objecting to something, then you really don't need a yes or a no. It can just be, are we all in agreement? Okay, it's adopted by unanimous vote or by acclamation. We've never really done it that way. We usually typically say, can I get a vote? All in favor say yes, all in favor say aye. It's evolved into aye over the years, but the charter says yes or no. It doesn't say aye. Whether we want to, be a little bit more loose with the translation, that's up to us, I think, but this is just charter trivia on the things that is expected of all of you as you run your meetings. You cannot vote when you have a conflict of interest. That's per charter. There are state laws on that and what conflict of interest means. That's, again, another couple hours, but I could give you the nutshell to start from is, other than common sense, obviously the nutshell version would be, if you voting on the thing would benefit you personally in some way, typically financially, or would benefit or have the appearance of benefiting somebody within your familial circles, that's usually the starting point for a conflict of interest test. Some people confuse that with, well, what if I have a conflict because I'm also a part of another organization, and that organization would want it to come out one way, but the city, the best interest of the city would be for it to come out the other way. That's more of an incompatible offices issue than it is a conflict of interest issue, because it's not your conflict of interest. The conflict derives from you owing a duty to both of those panels and not knowing what to do because you have to vote yes here and no there, or yes here and yes, whatever it is that's going to conflict, and that's going to put you in a position of stress. If that other thing, though, is not a public body, the Incompatible Offices Act does not apply. So then you do have to get back into, I'm on this board, this commission, this church group, whatever it is, and we're going to vote this way, but when I'm up here, I'm going to have to vote the other way because it's not in the best interest of the city. I have rarely ever seen that come up. I mean, I think typically if it's in the best interests of both when you're involved with both. But just to put it in your minds that if it's a true conflict for you in your seat as a council person, you have an obligation not to vote, in fact, on the issue. That's probably the only time that you're really discouraged from voting. The charter does say if everybody else excuses you from voting, then you can also abstain. But it's got to be unanimous.
Question.
Yes.
Just on that incompatible office thing, because I think it's important that people understand that. If, for instance, you are the chair of the SEMSD, and you're also the mayor of St. Clair Shores, those are, you may have a situation where you're voting on a matter of the SEMSD, and that would be figured out between you and your city attorney and your council. But if it's a church board and a city council, those are not incompatible offices because
They're private.
the church
Private
board is
public.
not an arm or a branch of the state.
Right. Private, public.
Okay,
So
thank
the incompatible offices won't apply, but you'll still feel conflicted because you owe a duty to both of those positions, and the duties may not match up, right? Church board may want the city to give it property, and you know that's not the best thing for the city to do, but you love your church board and you really want the church board to have it, so now you're conflicted, right? But it's not a personal benefit. You're not going to benefit. And if we ever get into a position like that, this is one of those times when I would hope that you would reach out, say, I'm conflicted, I don't know what I should do, I don't know if I should vote, I don't know if I should abstain, I don't know if I should recuse myself from one or the other positions in life just to get out of this problem that's causing me not to sleep. And then that's the kind of thing I can help, I think, guide you on in terms of what is it really? Is it really a conflict? Is it really a fiduciary duty issue? Can you vote both ways? Can you vote for the church to want this, and can you vote for the city to not approve it? Of course you can. You won't love yourself because you love both and you didn't want to, you want it to all work out, but you can do that. And so those are things to think about. The incompatible offices thing, just getting back to that, I wrote an opinion recently for a school, well, actually a college up in Genesee County. The college was concerned because one of its employees was running for county commissioner and had a good chance of winning. And the employee wasn't the dean, it wasn't at the highest level at the college, but it was in a pretty good level. On the hierarchy, it wasn't just, a part-timer or something. It was somebody with a long tenure with the college. And so the question was, if this person wins, is there an incompatible offices issue? And our analysis, or my analysis in conclusion, was pretty much, there's a likelihood of that, because in the county role, the person may have to vote on contracts or funding or something involving the college, and voting against that would impact this person's boss, potentially, the dean or whoever's in charge, or the board, and they would look unfavorably potentially on that person doing that. So this person's going to be conflicted to self-preservate, right? I have to vote a certain way in my county commission role to preserve what I have at the college, because I can't lose my day job, right? Just because I ran for office. So that's the kind of incompatible thing we're talking about, is when you run into that. There are some things, though, that are exempt. Doesn't affect you guys, but for example, school boards. School boards are allowed to have one person also serve on the intermediate school district. So you would think immediately that's an incompatible office. You can't be on the intermediate school board and the local school board, because they're going to have times when they don't want the same things. But the state law actually says, go for it, do that. We want that representation from the local school district to be on the intermediate school board. So there are times when statutorily we get around it because the parent makes the rules. It was asked a couple of years back, can we mix up the voting? And typically speaking.
I asked it. I'll admit it.
Because you start with
Not
B,
fair.
letter B. You need somebody to run for office who has an A, right? So you don't go first. all
Or
the
I
time.
changed my name.
Or you changed
I
my-
just thought about that just now. I go, wait a minute.
Zalewski, right?
Oh, you still be?
Right.
Amy Wilson.
Right? I don't know why the charter was written to require that, but we can't get around it without a charter amendment. It's just A through Z in that order every single time. And parliamentary,
Easier name changer.
Vote of the people.
name change would be much easier and cheaper. Yeah, for some reason that was written in there that way. I don't know why. I don't know what the thinking of the times were or was. There is no way around it, unfortunately. And it's only for roll calls, of course, but when we do a roll call, so under normal parliamentary procedure, I've typically counseled that the person who makes the motion votes first, the person who seconds it votes next, and then you rotate. The clerk or the clerk of the proceedings is supposed to rotate the order from the letterhead so that nobody's ever in the same spot, typically, or at least it's rotated like a ballot gets rotated. Can't do it in Fraser,
Here,
right?
but, and
Because I started when I was here.
That's how you started,
I'd
yeah.
already done it like
You did,
that,
yep.
And then you corrected me, or you corrected me.
I was
to
happy.
Show me that I couldn't do it that way, but I had taken minutes for almost 30 years and always done it that way.
Yep. It's a unique Fraser rule.
Okay.
Yep.
also, it's not on here, but anyone can ask for a roll call vote, and there is no seconding or anything else, it just happens.
Yep.
Correct?
Yep.
Correct, clerk? Is that how?
That I don't know. I can't tell you that.
She's not the
I'm gonna say
parliamentarian.
yes, no.
Are you the parliamentarian today, too?
No.
You can be.
But that anyone here can ask for a roll call vote, and a roll call vote will.
Yep, yep. It's basically almost like a point of order in a weird way, Basically, I just want it clarified, Mr. Mayor, and then we'll do it. We'll do it that way. So, and that way, there's no fighting about it. Like, you don't need a roll call vote. Yes, I do. And then we got to take a vote on the roll call. No, we don't have to do any of that.
Yep.
Just do it. Sort of like dividing the question. I believe that one doesn't require a second either.
Dividing the question?
So let's say you have a motion that has two components to it. It's going to adopt this and hire this. You can divide the question. You can say, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to divide the question.
Let's come.
Baranski special.
And vote on the first one.
I try to be efficient, but then when I don't get all of you, I'll take 4 on this and 4 on that.
So I'm pretty sure that one doesn't have a vote.
about
I think
my
it's just an automatic thing. There's a few like that in parliamentary procedure. I don't know, when you got your materials to be on council, did you get any Robert's Rules cheat sheets by any chance? Because if you don't have one, I'll get a couple that I have that I like.
There's some general Robert's rules in our rules of
In the
council.
rules, yeah. But I have these little cheat sheets that are really cool because they have little charts. It's kind of helpful if you get used to navigating the chart.
Tabling versus postponing.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one. That's a big one.
Postpone.
That's why we have you here, though.
I was just, you do. But that comes from experience, right? I mean, you just learn it over time. When I represented the Macomb County Charter Commission, And I don't think he would mind me name dropping him. Nick Shermatero was one of the many 26 members of that commission. And Nick had been in the legislature for many years. That was a time when I was learning parliamentary procedure from him, right? 2009. He was educating me at times about, even though I'm sitting in the chair, about how it's supposed to work. And he was just a font of knowledge when it came to that stuff. So we all can learn from each other. And even Mayor Lesich himself has taught me about voting on the minutes. And I told you this story, right? I've repeated this story to you. I had always taken the position until he pointed out there's actually something out there that contradicts my position, that if you were absent, you should abstain from voting on the minutes. And he pointed out that is not the rule.
Correct.
And when I did the research, because no one had ever asked me to research it, it was just something that's passed on from generation to generation. That's why I knew it, or thought I knew it. He pointed out that that's not necessarily the rule. I researched it and understood why it's not the rule. It's because if you have first of all, you have a fiduciary obligation to vote on things for the city and to approve things and get things done in your role. But the understanding is that as a council person, you have educated yourself. So if you're voting on the minutes, you understand that those minutes are accurate, even though you weren't there. And I've had to change because of him, that guy right there, I had to change my advice to every public body I sit with.
Hundreds of council meetings that I've watched.
Right, for sure. But that's how we learn.
Well, and there are also circumstances where you have the meeting minutes and somebody may have had, say, Dana, you were there at the meeting and you voted on something, but you actually weren't there, you were absent. So certainly you could vote on those minutes and make corrections to them.
Yes, and, we have video, and so you can
Yes.
watch it and you can see it, and
To educate yourself, right? But there's also, and when I did the research, there's also some sort of implied trust factor, right? That you trust that if there were anything wrong, those who were in attendance would point it out. So you're almost allowed to trust your fellow members, yeah.
That's a really weird.
Isn't it interesting? I found that great.
Second part, that trust part. Not
part, yeah.
just because the law is not based on trust. The
Right.
law is not based on trust. It's based on education.
Right.
And if I wasn't at the meeting, how do I know the minutes?
But there are times when the law is based on trust, not that I want to diverge too far, but Sam would appreciate this story. So when I do new officer training, I teach them about what's called the police team theory. The police team theory in the law is that if that officer saw it happen, you, officer, also saw it happen, even though you didn't see it happen. It's all, a team. So same thing for you guys, right? It's the council team theory.
That's the council team
Yeah,
theory.
it's the council team theory.
So make sure those minutes are right.
Yeah.
one more point of, on the agenda, on a consent item, or a consent agenda, any council member can ask that an item be removed and placed on the regular agenda. No vote is required.
No vote is required. You're not going to have a fight about it. There might be some people who groan because you're making the meeting last longer, but that's okay. It's your prerogative, right? You're allowed to do it.
Never know when it's going to be your turn to do that.
That's right. That's right. So don't groan.
What can go on a consent agenda?
Consent agendas are supposed to be designed to expedite the ministerial business of the city. Things that are not controversial, things that are not really going to be contested, things that are routine matters, whether it's minutes, whether it's receive and filing of things, commemorations, if you're not going to have a ceremony or have people here. I see it done in schools, for example, for like new hires, because there's really no reason to make an issue of it, right? It's just recognizing the new hire, or on occasion, I'll even see, a contract amendment or something, because you've all been informed in advance. So if you did feel that it needed to be discussed in public, you pull it.
So like
Right.
in theory, we could ask to talk about the budget line by line in every meeting.
We've done that.
Well, you can, and it's been done.
Yeah, it's
But that's
been
not really,
Mouth, I would never
Let
do
me
that.
know, because I'm missing that meeting.
right?
I'll be like,
That's not really, I think you're a little off topic, though. I think for the consent agenda, you would never have a budget on the consent agenda.
Well,
expenditures.
The expenditures.
Yes, for sure.
I think maybe a better question would be, are there things that are not allowed to be in the
oh,
consent
yeah, that's a
agenda?
better question.
Yeah, I think that yes, I think case by case, we'd look at that, but I think there are probably going to be non-ministerial things, discretion-related things that are not routine. And so all of your public action items, like wanting to hear about the new purchase of the new car and then vote on it or decide on it, I don't think those should be consent agenda because they're not ministerial. They're kind of big, right?
Appointments out to boards and things.
No, I think that's ministerial. I don't think,
Okay, because we had it on and then
Yeah.
we took it off and I just was,
Yep. I think those can be consent agenda.
okay, good.
And
Probably one of those things that can be either.
Right, yeah, I
Want to
can
recognize
see.
someone.
Right.
Yep.
One thing that I see in townships versus, in some townships, smaller ones especially, the bill run. Where the bill run will be, here's what we want to pay, and then the board will approve the payment of those bills. In this case, we receive and file the check register and the expenditure report. So that happens differently in different communities, in smaller cities, but in general, we have $1 million a month. We spend
To avoid
$1 million.
that type of thing too, right, is where you go through ahead of time and you would reach out to Elaine and say,
Correct.
hey, look at this huge, can you help me understand this huge expenditure? Like, why is it like that?
Correct, but in our case, we are not approving the expenditures themselves.
Right.
We did that through the budget and the approval of the budget, and as long as within budget,
Yes.
this is simply an acknowledgement and a register of what we spend. And I think you could probably attest to that in other communities, that's,
In our little township, we do.
yeah, here's the bills and we want to pay them. And smaller authorities and things like that do the same.
And to your point, one of the things I watch for with different communities and schools is whenever I'm reviewing a contract for something, they typically, a lot of these vendors want to, I want my payment in 2 weeks. I always advocate for, 45 days because I don't know when that community or school district's next board meeting is going to be. And if they have to do approval of the bills or approval of the expenditures on their agenda, I want to make sure. So I even do that for Fraser, even though I know it's sort of ministerial, just to make sure that they don't have an unreasonable expectation in case one of you has a question about the bill. I want to be clear that we have more time than 2 weeks to get you paid because that's not how cities work, right? It's just not that efficient. I also had on here that another charter trivia, a member may not miss a meeting without advising the mayor, manager, or clerk and explaining the reasons for the absence. Obviously, that's broad and vague. You don't have to get into HIPAA-related details of your medical life. But you are supposed to advise one of those three. What's the penalty if you don't do it? I suppose someone could argue it's misfeasance, malfeasance, some kind of feasance in office, but I've never seen that be an issue. Sometimes things come up in life, right? And now with texting, it's pretty easy to get a hold of people, but back in the old days,
Couldn't it be considered an unexcused absence, and that you have so many unexcused absences from council, you could get kicked out? Is that a concern?
no.
Not that it would ever happen, but isn't
No.
that the way that it's kind of written in the rules?
I don't think we have an automatic vacancy for missing.
Yes, we do.
That we
Do
did?
we? How mu- is it-
3 meetings.
I didn't think it was automatic, though. I think it has to
It's
come.
3
before
meetings.
a vote.
Yeah, doesn't
3
have to go to a,
consecutive meetings, I
go to a
believe.
tribunal? I can't remember if it's an automatic
Well,
vacancy.
that's how I got here. Mr. Morelli was
Oh.
was gone, and he had missed December, January, and then March was coming up, and he had just made the decision to leave.
Okay.
But that third meeting would have triggered something along that line. So-
Yeah.
And,
Okay.
yes, it is I believe it's in the charter. I'm pretty sure it
And
is.
so that's just missing. I don't think that matters if you notified people or didn't notify people.
If it's unexcused absence.
Is the word unexcused in the charter? I'd have to look.
It is unexcused.
It is
I believe it's-
unexcused?
I don't know if that's the
Yeah.
exact word, but that's essentially.
Because that's the whole reason why we do excused.
Yeah, if you're missing for a reason and you're
Right.
excused, that's entirely different, but there is a trigger.
Okay.
Good point.
It's never been used, as far as I know, to actually happen.
Right.
In this city. I've seen it happen in Warren.
When she starts going through the check register.
Warren Consolidated Schools did that a few years back.
I've seen it happen other places as well.
I was gonna say, I've seen it on like boards and commissions too.
Yep.
Yep, okay, this is what I was thinking of, the 25%. I knew there was a percentage in here, I didn't know what it was. Shall miss 4 consecutive regular meetings of the council or 25% of such meetings in any fiscal year of the city, so July to June, unless such absences shall be excused by the council and the reason therefore entered in the proceedings of the council at the time of such absence, so.
Yep.
So basically, just not showing up is not okay for that many times, you get a few free passes, but once you get to that 4th, make sure you call somebody. and-
Is it automatic if you have, or is it?
Yes,
That's like
no
the
tribunal.
Macomb Township person, Bucci,
Bucci, yeah.
where he just didn't show.
And here's the fascinating.
kick 'em off.
The fascinating part about the, right, the
Good that we
fascinating part
have
about the
that.
language is, shall be declared vacant by the council.
Shall.
Shall.
Even if 6 of you don't agree with kicking that person off, you shall do it, and you violate the charter if you don't kick them off, so, who knew? Yeah, it's automatic.
And you have to be within the city. You can't leave the city for more than 30 days without stepping foot inside the city limits.
If the officer shall absent himself continuously from the city for more than 30 consecutive days in any 1 year without permission of the council. So no long vacations, I guess, right?
Nope,
No snowbirds on council.
that's right.
All right, I added Open Meetings Act because we didn't have it on last time, and I don't remember if we broached it the last time we did this 2 years ago. That in itself is an hour and a half, of charts and case law and attorney general opinions and all of those things. But just the nutshell version, Open Meetings Act is the state law on how we conduct our public business or conduct it in public. It requires that. It's basically a sunshine law. The sun is supposed to shine on all your decisions that are made. The public should see you in action, making those decisions. And there shouldn't be anything happening behind that door or any other closed doors. And then you come out here and just go, approved, done, approved, done, approved, done. That's the whole point of it, right? Are there going to be times when you're all in unanimity and it's really easy and it's approved, done? Of course there are. But the courts have said, they use a Latin phrase, a fait accompli, right? They don't want it to be something that was preordained before you got here. They want you to actually discuss it, deliberate on it, hear from the public, vote on it, and do that in public so that the decisions are recorded in minutes and people can point to them later. There's a whole litany of exceptions and times when you can have closed sessions. They range from things like disciplinary hearing of an employee if the employee requests the closed session. I think Elaine and I were just talking about the nuances of that the other day for no real reason. We were just talking about it for some reason. And I said, I've never really had to look at it, but in theory, council could hold a disciplinary hearing for an employee, but not let the employee in the room. Because the employee can ask that it be closed, probably to protect their, embarrassment from the public and things like that. But there's no mandate in the Open Meetings Act that the employee gets to be in the room when you're having the closed session about that employee. So fascinating legal question I've never had to answer yet, because usually the courtesy is extended for the employee to be part of the conversation and have it all talked about in closed session. And the same goes for like student discipline hearings and things in schools. But I've never actually had to look at, nor have I ever seen a case or an attorney general opinion that talks about, what if the council doesn't want you in there? The general rule is city council decides who goes in closed sessions, period. Like, it's up to you who gets to come and go in those closed sessions. And if you don't want somebody, or you do want somebody in that room, it's your discretion, it's your closed session.
Except for council members, they all get to go.
They all get to go, yep. Even if they have a conflict, even if, the strangest thing sometimes in public bodies is if they're involved or somehow in a part of a lawsuit, and yet they have to go in closed session and talk to the lawyers about the lawsuit. That gets really strange.
Yes, it does.
So, and a little messy. But that's part of public governance, right? You have to just accept that and work and roll with it. But yeah, closed sessions, it's city council's discretion as to who's in the room. And there are, like I said, a litany of exceptions. There's the discipline hearing thing at the request of the employee. There's privileged communications from your attorney. The courts have ruled, though, that it does need to be a written opinion for some reason. It can't be an oral opinion, probably just because it gets abused. If you just can say you were back there to have an oral opinion from your attorney, and who knows what really happened. So it's got to be in writing, a written opinion. You go back, you talk about the written opinion. You can expand on written opinions and kind of talk about the peripheral effects of those opinions. I see it a lot, in terms of like collective bargaining. We talk about the opinion, and especially now with the state and all of the laws they're changing, and the new administration is really revoking and pulling back and revising so many things. It's important for lawyers to be able to go back in closed session and talk to their public bodies, mostly schools, about all these changes and what they mean. There are other privileges, but that's really the main one. Other exceptions, I'm trying to think off the top of my head. There's many. A lot of them don't apply to public bodies like cities, so we won't have to worry about them. But, like considering purchasing real estate is another one. The courts and the state recognize you don't want the price to get artificially inflated, because it's best if the people get to pay for it at a reasonable price. So you can talk about that in closed session, and whether or not to buy a piece of property and what to offer and things like that.
Purchase of real property, not the sale.
Correct, not the sale. The sale's a different issue. That can't be discussed in closed session. Now, could you talk about the legal consequences of selling by virtue of a legal opinion? Yeah, if there's going to be a legal consequence, maybe there's a reverter clause, or there's restrictions on sale, or what it's to be used for perpetuity. Of course, we can go back and talk about that. But actually just having a conversation about, we're ready to sell the DPW building. No, you can't go into closed session for that. So.
And you have to have a vote of 7 to go into closed session.
No, you have to have 4, unless it's a specific, Open Meetings Act has a list of things that have to have 5. So there's 2/3 requirements for some, and there's a majority for some. Just depends on the
A
exception.
simple majority of the quorum, or is it a majority of the council?
I think it's a simple majority of the quorum and a supermajority of whoever's there, supermajority of the quorum. So if you don't have all 7, it's not a 5-member vote, I think.
Was it when it was a special meeting? Because that happened.
Yes, special meetings, we have in our rules that
Oh, that's our-
it's a
that's
majority.
our rule.
Right, for special meetings, the majority has to support changing or adding something to the agenda that isn't already there.
No, but it was 7 to go into closed session, because we didn't get to go into closed session.
No.
I think we
no,
added a
it's-
closed session.
You were adding,
Yep.
I was the one that voted no on that.
Yeah.
And so.
Just so we
were
know
at
the rules.
We were at a special meeting, and in order to add something to the agenda of the special meeting, you have to have all members of the council or written
Approval.
approval, thank you, by the absent members. So you have to have all 7 to agree, because you don't want to go into, you don't want to have a discussion of something at a special meeting that does not involve somebody that is not there.
Okay.
Unless they say, yeah, you can go ahead and do that. That was the case.
All right, I'm going to correct myself in part because I pulled up the statute. So if it's one of the ones that requires 2/3, it has to be 2/3 roll call vote of the elected or appointed and serving members, even if there's absences.
That's for a,
Any of the 2/3 ones, any of the ones that require a 2/3 vote, there's a whole list of things that 2/3 to go into closed session versus majority.
Okay.
It does not have the same requirement for majority. So that would be a majority of whoever's here, I guess, 3 to 2.
so give me an example of just a simple majority,
Um,
if you could.
Yep, I will. So 8A is the perfect example, 8A, 8B, 8C. So when you're talking about disciplining an employee, simple majority. When you're talking about.
Of the quorum?
Student, simple majority, yep. And I think the legislature actually, I don't give them a lot of credit for some of the things they do, but I think they put some thought into this one. And they thought, you know, when we're protecting like an employee's privacy rights or an employee's dirty laundry, we don't need it to be as rigid or as, you know, have a supermajority, because if somebody's not here, it changes the voting dynamic. So I think they were more flexible when people are involved or human elements are involved. Whereas, for example, to go into closed session and talk about a legal opinion, they want it to be 2/3
2/3 of the,
of the elected and servings, yeah. So 5, no matter how many are here. So which is a strange rule when you think
Couldn't
about
go
it.
in if there's only 4?
You cannot, and this just came up in a school district I work
Oh,
with.
that's fascinating.
The school district had different lawyers before they called me, and those lawyers brought them a legal opinion report on, oh, I can't remember what the issue was now, but it wasn't that long ago, it was about a year ago. And the school board is very divided right now in that school district, and it's in Oakland County. And they voted 4-3 to go into closed session. The lawyers who brought the opinion didn't correct them, and they went into closed session. And they held a closed session on those topics, the legal opinion that was being discussed. So when the superintendent called me and asked about that, I said, well, really shouldn't have gone into closed session that night. Shouldn't have happened. I don't know how you reenact the discussion of that legal opinion. It's still going to be 4-3 every time, so you really can't, which means the privilege will be blown if you discuss it in public. So shame on them for doing that. Don't let it happen again. And he hasn't called those lawyers again since.
but at that point, that would be an open meeting act violation.
It was.
Somebody,
It was and it is.
somebody called it out, they would be the,
It is. And you know, the remedy for Open Meetings Act violations is to reenact the thing you did wrong so that you do it in public and you do it right, and everybody can have confidence in you. How do you reenact a closed session on a legal opinion when you're divided 4-3 and you can't get into closed session to talk about it? Right? You can't correct it. So it's an uncorrected violation of the Open Meetings Act. And I've never understood that one, because to me, it's the privilege adheres to the city. 4 of you is the majority of council. It should just be a majority that control the privilege. Why does the 5th person control the privilege? Because otherwise, you're not going to get to hear the information if it's privileged, and you're not going to go into closed session. But they were obstinate
But
in
you
that.
get the vote, you get, because it's so that the, what is that called? The simple majority doesn't control everything.
But they control the privilege, right? If you were to waive your attorney-client privilege and release something, it only takes 4 of you. So why does it take 5 to go talk about it? Isn't it fascinating?
Okay,
This is the kind of
so-
stuff that goes
Sorry.
through my mind.
without going deep into the weeds.
We're already there.
So this district in Oakland County went into closed session to discuss a written legal opinion and committed an OMA violation.
They did.
So the council or the school board could come out and then remove privilege from that, and then everybody know what happened.
They could.
Okay.
Yeah.
That would be a way to correct it.
They could-
Just also open a can.
Could, they could reenact it by saying, hey, lawyers, tell us what you told us in the closed session, let's do it in public. They could, but now there's no privilege. So now it's just lawyers giving a report on something that isn't privileged anymore because it's
We've
being
removed privilege on things in the past.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And I don't remember the topic, so I don't know if it was so sensitive anymore. I can't remember that they really couldn't talk about it in public or shouldn't. So I don't know if that was the fix there for them. But I know they never went back and dealt with it again. They had to move on from it and learn from it. And the good news is, when we talked about scaring all of you, is it's not going to be criminal and it's not going to be severely punished, maybe a slap on the wrist or a reprimand from the county prosecutor or the AG or somebody that looks at it, if it was an unknowing, unintentional mistake, or, I always do this, and one day it's going to bite me, right? Blame the lawyers, right? Blame the lawyer. The lawyer should have known better. So I always tell you, I will tell all of you again today, if I give you the direction, then you have the ability to say the lawyer told me, so I did it in good faith, right? And that's the test. It's really about good faith as opposed to bad faith or intentional. That being said, and this is why it's important to blame the lawyers, all joking aside, the courts, the attorney generals have ruled that you have a duty to at least ask the question whether it's appropriate under the Open Meetings Act. I get that sometimes you don't know what you don't know. You wouldn't even know you had a duty or how to ask the question. But that's why we do trainings like this, and that's why we do orientations and MML things and informational, things, because the courts are kind of serious about that. Like, ask your lawyer if you don't know if you should be doing a closed session or how to get to closed session. Ask. Because if you just do it without asking the question, that gets closer to you just intentionally kind of put the blinders on and you didn't even think about it. So keep that in mind. But always, I'm here to be blamed. That's good for you. It protects you. So I always tell Cindy, I'm here to keep you out of jail. So.
Yeah, you two are going, not us.
Yes, I've already asked her, do you want vertical or horizontal stripes? Do you want orange, black?
An orange, yeah.
If I can't accomplish the mission, and I have a fire marshal in another community, he always jokes, like, you've kept me out of jail so far, for all the things he wants to do. So blame the lawyer.
Don't know, ask the lawyer.
And if you don't know, ask. That's right. Food for thought on this page. I don't know how much more the Open Meetings Act we want to really talk about. Oh, I guess we should talk about a little bit more. So just in general, kind of what the Open Meetings Act stands for, public participation, the ability to address all of you. That gets garbled, I think, in different places, in different ways, in terms of what does it really mean. In my opinion, but you guys, every elected body can do what it wants. In my opinion, it's them to address you, not back and forth. And I think that works well. In every community I've ever seen that process play out, it's always, thank you for the feedback, thank you for the information. City manager, superintendent, can you get back with this person, or can you get the information to us that we need to make a decision to help with this issue? That's the better way than exploring it as if you're the ones that are going to solve it, right? So typically back and forth is discouraged. It's not required, of course, by the Open Meetings Act. That being said, I love that here we know so many people, right? We're able to have good conversations, and you can go back and forth a little bit. But it gets messy when the issues get tight, right? When you pack the room, it can get a little more dicey to be colloquial with people or have the back and forth. And at that point, the efficient administration of a meeting really kind of demands that the chair, whoever it be, zoning, planning, kind of really take the reins and say, thank you for your comments, your time is up, we have to move on, we have a lot to do. So it's really about efficiency. Open Meetings Act does allow people to stream, it does allow people to record, it does allow the media, you can set reasonable rules for that so they don't interfere, obstruct, get in the way. You guys will appreciate this, I hope. In a school district during COVID, we got to a point where people were not happy about the school district requiring masks for the kids. Mm-hmm. And it got to the point where it didn't matter if they were residents or just special interests from outside or people on the same cause. And it doesn't matter right or wrong, but they came to the meetings and disrupted the public participation. They refused to wear the masks, for one, but it's open meetings, and so we kind of dealt with that. But the bigger issue was when somebody came up to speak in favor of masks for the kids, these people just shouted them down, made fun of them. I mean, I remember there was a lawyer who was a little bit on the heavier side, and they were calling him names. And he was a lawyer in favor of the masks. And calling him names regarding his size and his weight. It was just completely inappropriate, regardless of right or wrong on the policy. So we actually took a recess and tried to figure out how to deal with the obstruction. And the best we could come up with at that point was we just work our way through it, right? If we have to ask for police help, we'll do it to remove some disruptors. But what we came up with after that, and it could work even in non-COVID days, because in another community we did it once. What we decided to do, though, was the Open Meetings Act just says a time, a place, a location where everybody can get there and observe you. It doesn't say they have to be in the room with you. So we took the board, we put them in a separate room, we put everything on TV, and in the main room, where all the people with their signs and all their angriness came to the meeting the next week or the next month, thinking they're going to get another shot at this, all they could look at was a screen. And when it was their turn to participate with the board, one at a time, they were allowed to come in and stand at the podium and address the board in person. That's going to be one of my favorite stories forever, because it immediately deflated anybody trying to disrupt the meeting. And in the other community I talked about, that was a meeting much like more of a more controversial issue in the community, where right or wrong, people had strong opinions about something. Probably the ones against it their opinions weren't really pertinent to the decision being made, but they packed the room, packed. At one point, we just cleared the room and made everybody go watch the city council on the TV screen outside the room. The federal court upheld that and said, absolutely, they're still observing. They can see into the room. They can see the TV. They're observing. They have the right to participate one at a time if you want to bring them back in one at a time. But for order, for decorum, for the business of the city, it was perfectly fine. So, little Open Meetings Act anecdote in terms of, the public has rights. They're statutory, not constitutional. Don't confuse any of this with First Amendment, right? We're not shutting you down based on viewpoint or any of that other thing. This is about efficient business of the city, about conducting the business you're here to do, giving people a chance to participate in that, but to do it in an orderly way. And if they can't or won't, then to preserve the rights of all, we just separate them from you. And one at a time, they get a chance to talk to you. And it's amazing how much more polite those people were when they did get their chance one-on-one in the room at the podium. It was so much more civil. They made their points. They had their positions. But it was just a much more efficient way of doing it. And everybody could be heard equally without judgment. What else, Open Meetings Act related? Anything else of import? I think that's probably a short version of some things you need to know. The highlights, anyway.
There's some good MML guidelines on the Open Meeting Act, and the state puts one out, too.
Yep. The food for thought stuff is mostly Open Meetings Act sort of peripheral. Not the voting and fiduciary duty stuff. I'll talk about that next. But emailing, texting, talking to each other. Obviously, if you do it as a quorum, one of my scare tactics is if you copy everybody and they can see that you copied everybody, you're now getting close to deliberation territory, as long as you're not just asking a question or if you're not just asking a question or gathering information from people like, hey, anybody got a copy of X? That's fine. That's not going to get you in trouble in the Open Meetings Act. Hey, how do we all feel about X? Is going to get you in trouble under the Open Meetings Act if anybody responds to that. The courts and AG have even gone so far as to say, it's going to be case by case, but even if you blind copy, if it becomes where people return the blind copy and circulate, it gets a lot closer to deliberating outside of this room. So be very conscious of that, be very careful. That being said, the courts, everybody's fine with, I think we talked about it earlier. Sherry, you want to call Amy? I'm thinking about voting no on this thing on Thursday night. How are you feeling about it? Perfectly fine, one-on-one. She can convince you, you can convince her, you can agree to disagree, and you can move on, but at least you know, right? At least you had the talk. You can do it with 2 and 1, so 3. What the courts don't like is when you go, let's set up a Zoom, and I'm going to have Kenny and Patrick and me, we're going to talk. All right, Kenny, step out for a minute, and Dana, you come on into the Zoom. All right, Dana, you sat here for a little bit. We talked about, Dana, step out for a minute. Amy, come on in. We call that round. That's called round robining. Do not do round robining, okay? Do not.
What's around the horn? I saw that mentioned the other day.
Around the horn.
I saw that in the
Yeah.
paper there, Dave, about somebody that would violating the Open Meeting Act.
I think of that as just talking to everybody one at a time. I don't know why it would be, what the context was for that. Unless it was sort of like an email around the horn. I don't know if it was in
I don't remember
telephonic.
the,
Yeah,
I just saw it as a strange term because I've heard the round robin.
round robining term, yeah. So don't do that. Try to avoid group texts and group emails, unless, again, they're fact gathering or questions being asked, and that's it, and not deliberating on how we're going to do things. Information gathering I have on here is perfectly fine. You have to learn, right? You don't be afraid to learn if you have a question about something from whoever you have to ask, including the whole council. I've learned very quickly that if you're looking for old records of the city, email the mayor. Somehow he has things that no one else can find. So that's an organized guy. So, yeah, but, Mark Steinmack with zoning board, same thing. If you need minutes from the 80s, that's the guy to call, right? He kept all of his zoning board stuff, and I think he still has it. So I don't know if he's going to turn it over to our historian. Who's our historian? Would that be you, someday?
I think
But
at some point, yes.
at some point, yes? Okay. Minutes. Oh, minutes is a fun topic, and I know it's,
Where you going?
oh, sure.
Emails.
Yes.
If, let's say that somebody has a thought, and can they blind copy everyone and say, I'd like to talk to you, give me a call?
Yes.
Or let's say I emailed him. I emailed everyone and he replied to me.
Yes.
Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay.
But, caveat.
But, what's the but? Yes.
Caveat, if your email was not, hey, give me a call, everybody, one at a time, but your email was, we have this big park project on the agenda, and we're going to create a brand-new park, and we're going to dedicate it, and I'm thinking we should do it this way, and I'm thinking, we should fund it like this, and you start getting into the how of the decision-making, then even blind copying, the courts have found to be suspect, because it gives the impression that it led to more deliberating, especially if only Kenny replies to you, because he didn't see that it was blind copied to everybody else. You still started the deliberating process by putting yourself out there and asking for everybody to be a part of that conversation. So information gathering, question asking, hey, give me a call, or hey, we have a meeting coming up, we have to change the date, or we're thinking about changing the date, what do you want to do about that? All good. What do you want to do about spending, parks, hiring, programming, budget season? Bad. Don't even blind copy if you can avoid it.
Say that again. Repeat that one more time.
Blind copying people on deliberations of things you're going to do, spending, hiring, projects, budgeting, whatever it's going to be, just avoid altogether, unless you're just doing it to say, hey, everybody, I'm new. Do you have last year's budget that you could send to me? You put it out there to everybody. Why send 3 emails when you can do it in one, right? That's you're gathering
And
information.
just one thing. And if somebody replies to you, don't forward it to someone else.
Best not to
Best
start
not
doing
to.
that, because now you're doing the deliberating through a round robining or through a telephone game kind of thing. So, yeah, best to avoid.
Okay.
The topic of minutes is not an exciting one, but I put it on there because it's one of the things that comes up from time to time. Open Meetings Act does not require that you approve the minutes of your closed sessions. So there's 2 schools of thought on that. Do you approve them at your next closed session? I've always said no. There's no point. If you want to know what the minutes say, they're going to be pretty perfunctory. They're not going to say much. And you're always welcome to look at them if you want to look at them, but they're not going to get into detail about what happened. It's usually going to say, closed session was held at 7:59 p.m. to discuss a legal opinion of the city attorney regarding X, or to discuss the potential purchase of real estate at such and such address. It's going to be very perfunctory. It's not going to get into a verbatim recording. On that topic, every board, every commission, every public body has a different opinion on should it be a verbatim recording? How much should be in the minutes? My starting point, or the legal starting point, is minutes only have to tell us what you did. That's it. Agenda item, a motion was made, by whom? A second was made by whom? All in favor, all opposed, all abstained? They don't have to go any farther, but they can. And that's really sort of a heartbeat thing that we talked about earlier, the energy of the community and what it prefers. One of the school districts I worked with a couple years back had a couple of newbies that got on with probably less than pure motives. They really didn't participate. They were a little shadier in terms of why they were there. They were young, probably just maybe misinformed or misguided a bit. They were always quiet. They didn't really cause too much trouble, but one of the newbies wanted to have his comments sort of verbatim in every set of minutes, probably for political aspirations or to use quotes later. We don't really know his motive, but the school board wasn't really keen on that idea. They kind of wanted to keep it more basic. Ultimately, their minutes still do reflect generalities. The board president thanked the community for a great trunk or treat, or whatever it may be. But they don't get into too much verbatimness. That being said, you all have that discretion as a council if you think it should have more or less, or get into things that aren't currently being done, and that direction can be given. One of the things I will recommend, though, is for anything that could be appealed to circuit court, I do think it's good that the minutes have more than less. Not necessarily opinions, but definitely fact information, information that's been presented, evidence, so to speak. Because when the courts are going to look at what you've done, whether it's denying a rezoning or approving approving the budget, for example, that's a public hearing, right? So that being said, courts are looking for the record, and the record is the minutes. Nowadays, judges and the public and people generally get confused and think the video or the audio is the record. It's kind of become blurred that is kind of the record now too, but the minutes still are your official record of what you did and how it was done. So for public hearing type things that could be appealed, I suggest a little more detail, and I think we do a good job of that already. I'm not saying we should change anything we're doing. And I kind of keep an eye on that too, just to kind of guide that a little bit. But I do think it's important to keep that in mind, that minutes are allowed to be very, very cursory, very, very basic. And then it's just up to the community if it wants them to be a little more involved or a little more detailed. So.
Can you add, if you wanted something added to the record, can you ask for that to be?
This is a fun topic that gets really,
didn't want it.
really convoluted. And my definition of fun, Alyssa at my office will always tell you, my definition of fun is a little skewed. But yes and no. Any council person could raise with the keeper of the minutes that something is missing, something is wrong, something is misspelled, ministerial corrections. But they have to be accurate. What always makes me smile a bit is when somebody says, can we change the minutes to actually say this? No, that's not what was actually said. And no, these are a snapshot in time. If something changed a week later, you don't put it in the minutes to show that it changed a week later because it wasn't happening then. So I think it's very important that you sometimes will look at the minutes and go, this just seems wacky now because things have changed so much in 3 weeks. But that's okay. It's just a snapshot in time. If you ever want to correct the snapshot or update the snapshot, do it in your next minutes, right? And then you follow the trail. And the trail will paint the story for you so that it's accurate for anybody reading down the road.
If there is, let's say that we get the minutes, we approve them, and then somebody discovers something, maybe a vote was misrepresented in there, if somebody got the vote wrong. When can that be corrected in a future one, and is there a time limit?
No time limit. It can be corrected. The rules under the Open Meetings Act are that whatever you do and whenever you do it, you're supposed to approve them at your next meeting, of course. It doesn't always work that way with reality, but if you do, and they're approved, or even if they're not approved, and either way, this is going to apply to both examples, either changing them before you approve them or changing them after. Do it at a public meeting, and the city clerk's obligated to keep both versions. So, and I know she would do that. So keep both versions, the original approved version, and then one showing what was fixed by council at a different time. Okay. Or if it wasn't an approved version, but it was the original draft presented to you, and there were corrections to it, then those corrections, substantive corrections, I'm not talking about a capital T or the word in is missing, but substantive corrections are supposed to be kept in both versions so the public or you can see how they were amended and why. Okay. Voting and fiduciary duties is always a good topic for rules and procedures, so I stuck it in here as just sort of food for thought because I'm often confronted with the issue. As a council person, your oath doesn't really give this to you or explain it, but you have certain duties, and they're known as fiduciary duties. You are a fiduciary caretaker of the city's assets, the city's property, tangible, intangible, intellectual. And as a fiduciary, as a caretaker of those things, you have certain duties that go along with that. There are duties such as the duty of loyalty, the duty of care, These duties have legal definitions and bigger than tonight's topic. But in general, what they mean is you should not be acting in self-interest. You should not be acting in the interest of someone else that is contrary to the community or the city that you represent. And all of your obligations, all of your duties to the city should come first. And if you can't do that, you should probably stop doing the role of city council. That being said, you all make your own decisions and you all answer to your own conscience as to what is right for the city, you know, and that's going to be different 7 people across, or it'll be unanimous 7 people across. I always say that city councils and school boards are like juries, right? You come from different walks of life, you're all impaneled, and you're all asked to make a decision or decisions. And you should bring with you what you've learned in life, what you know, what you don't know, your careers, your experience levels, your expertise. You should have all of that brought to the table, because that's the only way we're going to ever think about things from a different viewpoint. And that's what jurors do, right? When they're back in the room, deliberating on the fate of whether it's a murder case or a corporate thing or Medicare fraud or something horribly boring, contract dispute. They're in there talking from their own points of view in life. You know, I come from a background of engineering and I see it this way. I come from a background of social work and I see it this way. I come from a background of managing a restaurant and this is what we would do, right? And so I think all of you should feel confident to bring those expertises and backgrounds with you. Not that you're bragging about it, not that you're sitting up there telling the world, well, I do banking for a living, so as a banker, I know better. It's not that, but as a banker, I know about regulations, or I know about these rules we have to follow, and it seems like good business practice. So from just the way I've been trained and raised and brought up and worked in this career, why don't we do it this way? Or have we ever thought about doing this way? Or why can't we do it this way? Are there rules that prohibit us because we're a city and not a bank, right? So those things, when I talk about voting and fiduciary duties, what I'm saying to you is use your life experience for your ability to form an opinion on what's best for the city of Fraser. And don't be afraid of that. Don't think that because your life experience is different than somebody else's, it's not as valuable or it's not as important, because it is. And when it comes to voting, the general rule is you have an obligation to vote. That's what you're here to do. And it's very rare and shouldn't happen often when you abstain from something. You know, I think we talked last meeting or meeting before about appointing one of you to a role or something, right? Whatever that role may be, whether it's SEMCOG or MML or whatever it might be, or sending somebody. Nobody should abstain from voting for themselves if they think they're okay with doing the role, right? If they want the role. So abstentions should be limited. They should be very rare. They should usually be for conflict of interest, and there are going to even be times when a conflict type of thing, you just disclose it. You just put it out in the world, and as long as the council isn't unanimously telling you to not vote, you put it out there. And now you're going to vote your conscience and what you think is best for the city. That's your duty to the city, is to vote and to be a part of the decision making.
And I learned several years ago that under state law, they're pretty broad, that they say, you know, there's, for a pecuniary interest, it's relatively, there's relatively few rules. It's more your conscience. And that familial
Connection, yeah.
connection is relatively small.
It is. It is. Yep.
So you always have to look at the law itself.
Yep.
I actually called the MML, talked to the general counsel about that once, and he was quite clear. It's very good.
Yep. Okay, that's what I have on rules and procedures. The next page, unless we're taking a break, is parliamentary, which is similar, and decorum, which is similar, but I don't know if we're ready for a break or want to keep going, Mr. Mayor.
I'm out.
I'm just throwing pages at you.
That's right.
Learn by osmosis.
Or are we just breaking?
We will take a 10-minute break. We'll be back at 8:23, something like that. 8:24. Okay, thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
Back, and our administration, please take it away.
We are moving on to page 3 of the 4-page agenda items outlined for tonight. Page 3 is entitled, and item 3 on the agenda, or I guess it's 5C, is entitled Parliamentary Procedure and Council Decorum. This one will be a shorter one because we're not going to spend all night learning to be parliamentarians. That's a lot. I've seen some great ones come out, though, from the MML or from MSU's extension and really talk to communities about parliamentary procedure. Some really, really good presentations. So if you ever do want that hour-long, nutshell, Cliff's Notes, they do great work. And they know it back of their hand. But in general, we've decided as a community that Robert's Rules of Order apply. So if you don't know what Robert's Rules of Order are, you might want to go online and just type it in and kind of get a sense of what Robert's rules are. They are, generally speaking, designed and have been designed for many years to give bodies, large assemblies, some general protocols that have evolved, and I think they're on the 12th edition or whatever they're on, have evolved over the years to guide how meetings of assemblies are conducted. Somehow, that became sort of the norm to go to for smaller bodies, like a 7-person or a 5-person or a 9-person board or commission. And in general, it works, but they have a lot of irrelevant things in there, too, that really will never affect us in terms of how people from the floor can get involved when you're dealing with 200 or 300 people at an assembly. In our own rules, however, we have the discretion and the right, and we have done the ability to modify some rules or add some specific rules. The first, for my purposes on this chart, and I'm sure there are many others, the mayor is the chair of the meeting. He's the presiding officer. All member requests, even to speak, must be recognized by the chair. That's just a rule of order, right? It's just to keep from getting into chaos where everyone wants to speak over everybody. The chair recognizes the right to speak, and then the person may speak. If you fail to honor that decorum, you can be ruled by the chair to be out of order. And gavel down if it has to get to that point. Like, please stop talking. You are not in order at the moment. You do not have the floor. Hopefully, it never ever has to be that way. But at times bodies get heated, and everybody's got to get in there and say their piece. And they're afraid they might not get the chance, or they want to get in next. And the poor mayor has the button system in Fraser, so has to watch the lights and hopefully kind of gauge who's next and what order to go in. Direct communication between members is generally not permitted unless the dialogue is granted by the chair. So we're a little more colloquial, I'd say, in Fraser, a little more informal. There are times when you will address each other just as part of the friendly conversation going back and forth on whatever the topic may be of the day. But as a general rule, if the mayor or the presiding officer, mayor pro tem, whoever it may be, wished to enforce that for some reason because it's devolving or it's holding us back from getting out before midnight, certainly they can say, listen, dialogue between each other isn't permitted. That's out of order, guys. Let's keep moving here. Let's move on. You guys talk later. Or he'll recognize one at a time if that needs to happen. We do have these interesting rules in here that are a little more formal. References to other members are supposed to be, and they're very specific in your rules, council member and then surname. That's how you're supposed to address each other, or refer to each other, I should say, because you're not directly addressing each other. We get more colloquial, I've noticed over the years, and there's nothing wrong with that, unless council wants to enforce its rules and stop that practice. It's just a rule. It's just to guide you in terms of how decorum should look. But if you happen to know each other and just call each other by a first name, that's not a problem. It's not going to get you in trouble unless the whole council is tired of it and wants you to go by surnames. References to the mayor. This is also a specific rule in your rules. Again, probably from years ago. Mr. Mayor or Madam Mayor, and Mr. Chairman or Madam Chairwoman. That's the general way to get the attention of the mayor. With the button system, you really don't need that anymore, but it's still in the rules in case you need to do it by voice for some reason. The proper process in your rules for gaining the floor to speak. You notify the mayor of your desire to speak, and as I note, it's using the button, but you are allowed to say Mr. Mayor and wait to be recognized. The buttons aren't even mentioned in your rules, so they're really not required to be used. It's just the way we've evolved the system. And if the member has a question or directive for someone, begin with, and nobody in Fraser has ever done this, to my knowledge, through the chair to.
What's in front of you right now? Is there a little Post-it?
You've done through the chair
You
too?
told us 2 years ago.
I did. Told you 2 years ago about this rule, yes. I do see this in other communities. It's just, again, the heartbeat, the energy, the vibe of the community that's evolved. They've gotten very used to, through the chair to Mr. Denault, or through the chair to Mr. Perry, or whoever it may be, through the chair to the director, Sam. It's supposed to be done that way because the chair is supposed to be the funnel through which communications leave your table, right? And if you do it that way, even though the chair isn't actually the funnel, because you're still going to address the person that you wanted to address, you're basically getting the chair's acquiescence to do it. It's a decorum rule because it allows for that breath. It allows for that moment where the chair can say, where we're at right now, maybe directing something to that individual, this isn't the place or the time, right? It's just that pause. It's just that moment to take a thought. Like I said, the other community that I've seen it in, it's very common. I really don't see it here, and I don't think you've needed it. But it is there in your rules in case you ever feel the need to go to that extreme, or if you just love it and you just all want to start getting used to doing it that way. Sometimes it's kind of cool to just start to use some of that formality up there and through the chair too, and just get used to saying it that way every time you want to address someone or somebody about something. Your rules do set forth various types of motions and their precedents and whether they are debatable. Unless you have a specific one you want me to look into, I don't have any examples for you at the moment. We talked about a bunch earlier.
Our consent agenda, is that a debatable? That's not a debatable, is it?
In what sense? You mean removing something or approving?
No, approving it. So the consent agenda is
It would be, that's a good question. It would be debatable from the standpoint of, did we miss anything? Is there something that's wrong? But the minute you start talking about a specific thing on there, you're pulling it. Discuss it individually, yeah.
That's what I just wanted.
So the debate would only be about the propriety of doing it, maybe.
That's been my understanding, is that we don't debate that.
Right.
Unless you want to pull something out, then that item
You debate the
becomes
item.
debatable.
Yep,
Yes.
yep. To make a motion, your rules say that, Mr. Mayor, I move that. And we don't get that formal. We can say, I'd like to make a motion to, or I make a motion to, and then we can either spell it out, write it out, or I sometimes like a motion to approve the agenda item as submitted, I don't want to say agenda item, but to, Elaine has the form, and it has sort of the requested action at the bottom, which is great, very organized. So I make a motion to approve it as submitted, or to approve the requested action as submitted. Sometimes that takes the linguistics out of it for you guys too, so it's not as complicated when you're trying to figure out the wording of what you're trying to say. But as you all know, I will put my light on and I will help if I feel like it's very unclear or needs a little, tweak. Needs a little tweak. And And then we talked about any member may request a roll call vote at any time if you're not happy with the voice vote or comfortable with it, or you just want to know where everybody stands because you know it's going to be a little bit divided. You can ask for a roll call just to get it on the record as to who voted which way.
Question. We can, anyone can ask for the motion maker to repeat the motion before it's voted on? Is that?
Well, through the chair.
Through the chair, yes.
Yes.
We've done that before.
Yes, yes, yes.
And that is entirely appropriate.
It is, but the chair doesn't have to grant it,
Okay.
right? The chair could say, no, the motion was very clear. I don't think we need to restate it.
I generally
Especially if it's
would-
5 paragraphs. Right? But no, I think it's the chair's discretion. So if a member says, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to ask the clerk to restate the motion verbatim, if you feel it's appropriate, but they've never had a reason why it wasn't, you know?
Can the clerk?
The clerk could certainly request clarification because the clerk is the keeper of the minutes, so.
Well, I've always felt that if, before I'm voting on it, if I'm not clear on it,
Right.
all the elements of the motion, I would like it restated, at least paraphrased pretty close.
Yeah.
So that I'm sure that I'm voting on the thing that I
Yeah.
think I'm voting on.
Yeah,
That,
so don't take that away from us.
Yeah, you know what that,
well, no, I brought it
in
up.
favor of it.
we know you have all the power,
No, I'm the one that has
Right.
used that probably more
Right.
than others, so. And so I think that's a very important thing.
I find the need for that is when there's been a lot of discussion.
Yeah.
Yes,
Because you kind of lose track of where it started.
yes,
It also gets interesting when you have amendments to the motion.
correct. And I want to make, and that's when I've always thought that. All right, keep going.
Yep. So then all I have on here for parliamentary procedure, council decorum, you can read your own rules and kind of get a flavor for those and ask questions if you have any when you go through them. All members have an equal vote. Doesn't matter what your title is or who you are. Your vote counts as 1/7 of the whole council, or 1/5 or 1/6 or whoever's here that night, right? I talked earlier about no member acts for the entire council. No member speaks for the entire council. At most, a member speaks for what the council did. That's it. You don't speak for what the council will do because you can't predict the future. So, I found in preparing this a couple of good quotes. The City of Orlando does a nice parliamentary presentation. The will of the majority will be carried out, but only after the minority has had a fair chance to have its say. That's really the idea that everybody gets to speak at least once. Once that's been exhausted, at some point it may get to a point where you call the question. That's a misnomer. It's not really called call the question, but we call it that. And then it just becomes a question of whether the council is done with the debate and wants to move on to getting a vote. But as long as everybody's had a fair chance, that's when you can really kind of bring it to a close. Some people think that if I'm going to second a motion, that means I'm in favor of it. That is not at all what that means. If you second a motion, it's just because you really want to talk about it, right? And you know nobody else really likes it or wants to be the seconder, so you second it just to get it out there, right? And it may go down 6-1 because the maker of the motion might be the only one that likes it. But at least by seconding it, it didn't die, and it got some conversation out of all of you, right? And thoughts as to why or why not to do something. Courtesy and professionalism are just important to always remember. At the end of the day, like a jury, there's going to be times when you just can't figure out why your fellow council member did something so wrong. But in their mind, they were so right, and you were so wrong, right? And that's just okay, because you know what? The City of Fraser's still here. We're all still here. And all of those times when two people thought the other was so wrong, the building's still standing, right? Government still moves forward. Maybe it cost money, maybe a big mistake was made, maybe it was the best thing that ever happened, and the person that was opposed to it looks back and goes, man, was I wrong 10 years ago or 5 years ago? So courtesy and professionalism, respecting that everybody has their own thoughts or side to things, goes a long way in terms of getting work done and good decorum. The other quote is, or the other paragraph here from City of Orlando's presentation, parliamentary procedure is, first of all, based on common sense. I think I alluded to that earlier. It provides ways for handling only one thing at a time, for doing something with each piece of business. That is, passing it, killing it, or putting it aside in a definite place for later consideration. Once members understand the few basic rules and the reasons for their use, it is easy to look up the specific rules in a book on parliamentary procedure as members need them. What brings this all together is practice. Practice for both members and officers. So that's as I mentioned earlier, I was still learning and still am learning every day on parliamentary procedure. When something unique comes up, practice is how we learn. Getting it wrong is how we learn. Getting it right, we learn that way too, or we carry on traditions that maybe we should have known better about, but we never asked. So common sense, if it feels wrong, if it feels odd, ask the question, speak up, don't be shy. Even if there's no stupid questions, there's no dumb questions, right, as they say. Because if you don't ask, you don't know what you don't know. And that's all I have on parliamentary procedure and decorum.
Just a couple things, because you brought it up here, a seconder need not agree merely brings the motion to the discussion phase. So in Robert's rules, generally, it's motion is made, seconded, and then discussion can happen. We often have discussion before a motion is made.
We do.
And so how does that fit in? Or is that just the,
Well, because you are governed by Robert's rules, per your own rules, technically speaking, this is very technically speaking, you should not be discussing an agenda item until there's a motion and a second on the floor, right? Because if nobody's making a motion to do something with that agenda item, and nobody's seconded it, it dies, you move on, you don't even deal with the agenda item. Why are you wasting time talking about the agenda item before you have a motion and a second? That's efficiency. Reality is, sometimes you're just trying to understand the agenda item or understand what it means for all of you to talk about and do something with it. So you talk about it first. And unless there's a strong objection that the council says as a whole, let's move on, what are we doing? There's nothing wrong with that. It just isn't technically correct parliamentary procedure.
so if, and just throwing it, let's say we have a discussion that's going on for 20 minutes, and we're not getting anywhere. Can I, as the chair, say, does someone have a motion so we can move this forward?
Not only
Would that
can
be an
you,
appropriate
not only
thing?
can you, but I think you should.
Okay.
But use your discretion. I mean, of course,
Yeah.
if you feel the conversation is generating positive, you're getting somewhere, right? You're not going to cut it off,
No.
usually.
No, I'm not. And I just want to know if that would be
Yeah.
inappropriate.
Of course. Yep.
And then the other thing, if anyone is ever feeling they're not being heard, or if I'm missing your light, just say, ask to be recognized, and you'll be recognized. But sometimes I'm not perfect, and I'm listening with one ear, and things are, and there's 80 people there, and so, well, but that's the case, is that if you ever feel that way, just say, ask to be recognized, and you will be recognized, so.
That's where pro tem comes in, is your second set of eyes to kind of help prompt you when maybe you're focused on something.
Correct.
Oh,
Correct.
Turn, sorry.
All right.
That's good to know,
Yeah.
because I actually did that in the very first meeting, and I was like, should I have done that? So,
Yeah, pro tem is
Yep.
a great second set of eyes for the mayor to keep things focused.
Yep.
good.
And,
Thought I wasn't just being rude.
no, not at all. And the other thing is sidebar conversations. As opposed, you mentioned like two people here are talking back and forth. Sidebar conversations under the Open Meeting Act, the public is supposed to be able to hear whatever the council is talking about, in the spirit of the OMA, correct?
the spirit of the Open Meetings Act suggests that when you're in public on the stage, everything, they should be a party to it. They should be able to hear and understand it and see it. That being said, there's always a caveat, right? It's not a violation of the Open Meetings Act for two people to talk about something. So whether it's, hey, I just want you to know I got to leave early because I got to go get my kids, or whether it's, hey, I think the numbers are wrong. What do you think? Right? That's okay. It may be disruptive, and that's where the chair would have to kind of come in and say, I think there's a little disruption right now. We're having, a couple conversations at once. Can we kind of rein it back in? And if there's something that we need to talk about as a group, let's talk about it. Kind of like the teachers would do to us in school, right? When you're passing notes, like, is this something you want to share with the whole class? Same idea, same concept.
And that's my understanding as well, so, thank you.
Okay, and on the
Other
subject of those lights, I think the next 2 years when we do this again, I'm going to add that to this agenda because talking about recognizing the lights and how else we can address, I said the Mr. Mayor thing, but we don't really talk about the lights anywhere. They're not in the rules, they're not in the orientation.
They're just a visual aid.
They are, they're just there.
And I will apologize in advance if I ever refer to you as Mr. Odell or Mr. Perry, or,
Oh,
that will sometimes
Just don't refer to
happen.
me as Mr. Perry, and you're good.
I'll try not to, and I will.
You
but
can use my first name.
I will.
fine.
Well, I try to, be respectful, but there's times when you slip into a different.
Yep.
Yeah, so I just want to apologize in advance for that. So, okay. Thanks.
All right. And the final part of our presentation tonight was on the agenda as the budgetary process. And this is a good thing from an orientation standpoint because it's going to be happening before you know it. You're going to blink and it's here. For those of you who've been through it, I will presume, have some understanding, but there's a nuance that you're going to learn every single time and every single year, maybe until you've been doing it for 10 years. I don't know how long. Everybody has a different learning curve. But for purposes of tonight, I think it's just a good primer on sort of what to expect from it, because it's a big, mysterious thing, this budgetary process. You know, as a corporate entity, we have to create a budget. We have to budget for everything we do, and it's required by the state law, and there's a process, and there's public hearings, and what does all that mean? So I tried to break it down for you in very, sort of very simple guidance. I'm going to rely on Elaine, of course, to fill in some of the gaps that work on the boots on the ground level. But from the overview perspective, our fiscal year in Fraser, if you don't know this yet, begins on July 1st, which is counterintuitive to everything we do. When we go do our own personal taxes, July 1st to June 30th doesn't make any sense. But that's what we've chosen as a community many, 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 many moons ago, and that's what we use. I have some theories, but I've never really looked at why, but the state's fiscal year starts on October 1st. So that gets really, really weird when a city or a school district is trying to budget for the upcoming 12-month period, but doesn't know what the state is going to give them, because you're not going to know that till October. Maybe September if they get it adopted early, right, before October 1st. But if there's ever gridlock or deadlock, it might not even be done on October 1st. They might just shut down the state, like you always hear about the federal government may shut down. We have a budget dispute. So it is very strange to me. I think most cities navigate it pretty well because they aren't as heavily reliant on state budgeting, so to speak. Schools run into a bigger guessing game. They don't know what they're getting per head, per student in a seat until October, maybe September. So they're guessing in June so they can get their budget done as to what they're going to get paid by the state for those kids. But there are going to be some truths to that for cities too. So how our process works, by charter, March 15th is the deadline for everybody in the city to get their proposed budget to the city manager and explain why. So that doesn't affect all of you at all. It's really boards, commissions, officers, department heads, get to the city manager, the numbers they think based on maybe last year's, based on a new template or some new ideas, and then just explain it. Here's why I think the 2% increase is needed, or here's why I think the extra $100,000 is needed, or what it's going to be for, what we're going to need it for. And that's all they're obligated to do under the charter. Then the city manager takes all of that information, probably works with the finance director and everybody else, to put together a draft. And at the first regular council meeting in April, that's when you will receive a proposed budget. In theory, you got it early because it's in the agenda packet. But by that first council meeting in April, it's her obligation to have submitted to you a proposed budget. And the charter has certain details that are required, but there's no format requirement. So every city manager, every finance director may have their own personal preference or style for format. Every community has its own lifeblood in terms of what it looks like, how it's adopted, what it's called. And that's just evolves. That just evolves in each community based on the professionals that were hired to do it over the years. The public hearing then has to be set. So typically speaking, at that first council meeting in April, second week, you are going to set the date for the public hearing on the budget. The proposed budget, once you set the date, must be available for inspection 1 week before that public hearing, whenever you're going to hold it. You can hold it on a special meeting. You can hold it at the next meeting, which would be the second week of May. Keeping in mind, the second week of May is going to be your last shot, unless you want to use the third week of May, because you still have some details to iron out. Because between April 15th and the third Monday in May, council must adopt a budget. So that's your window. What's that? It's a charter requirement.
I know.
Oh, I know you know. I know where you're
2
going.
years in a row, we waited to the end of.
I know where you're going, yep. So what is the penalty? There isn't one.
I wanted by the third one.
Yeah, there isn't one. But having it done by the third Monday, so if you really think about how the calendar falls, your meeting is in the second week, that third Monday's coming up quick if you still have any details to iron out. But the charter says you must adopt the budget by then, and appropriating funds for municipal expenditures and providing for a levy for the amount of necessary to be raised by taxes. So all of that legalese means and this is, I think, really valuable for anybody who's newer to the process, is a budget is a document that outlines the amount of money that the council has allocated to a thing, whether it's people, whether it's operations, whether it's a department operating a thing, right? It's going to have its own line item or its own fund, as they call it. This is beyond, my expertise. This is just my experience talking in terms of what you call these things and how it looks. But the way I always think about it, as the more layperson-y look, is it is just an outline of the maximum amount of money that the city council is comfortable spending in the coming year for that purpose, whatever it may be. You can break it down into department and then all the little pieces, or you can just say department. This is what we're going to spend on the office of the city manager, right? Or in a place where it's a strong mayor, the mayor's office, and it's one number. That's the amount of money we can spend. And then it leaves a lot of discretion in terms of how to spend that money. Do I hire a chief of staff? Do I hire somebody else inside, support staff to assist with that office operation? Or, the community could break it down. Mayor, support staff, chief of staff, and have line items that's the maximum amount of money we'll spend on those people costs and any other things, whether it's office supplies or otherwise. So the format is discretionary. It can be as broad or as detailed as you want it to be, as it needs to be, as the professional preparing it thinks it should be. But that's what a budget is. It's a maximum amount for that thing that we're going to do. Appropriating funds sometimes gets confused with budgeting, and they do cross over because a budget is an appropriation of money. So if the council appropriates $1 million for public safety department operations, that's the budget for how much they can spend to operate that department, but it's also an appropriation of funds. Appropriate means you're allowed to spend it, okay? It doesn't mean you can spend it on anything you want, willy-nilly, in any amount you choose. Because we also have in our ordinances limitations on that. We have rules for going out to bid or getting proposals. We have a limit on how much the city manager can choose to spend, which is $7,500 currently. Worth talking about one day whether inflation should increase or change that a little bit, because it's getting antiquated now. But $7,500 is the limit right now for city manager expenditures. Anything over that amount is supposed to come to you for approval. Even though you've appropriated the money, even though you've said $1 million can be spent, well, it's still an oversight role for you. When it gets to $8,000 to buy the new police equipment, you kind of want it to come to you first rather than just have those decisions be arbitrarily made at the administrative level. Some communities are comfortable with that. And, there's a certain number at which we're good. Whether it's 10,000, whether it's 15, they're all over the board. But the point of it is that the council at some point in its lifespan thought there has to be a limit before we just want to keep it on. We just want to see it. We just want to know that it's a good thing for the city. We trust our people. We trust our administration. We just want to know. And we want it to be publicly, proclaimed as to why we're doing it and why it's important.
Is that our bylaws that dictate that? That's not charter.
Ordinance.
That's our ordinance.
Yep, that's your purchasing ordinance.
So how would that get changed?
An ordinance amendment. If you had a number in mind,
okay.
You just make an ordinance amendment. We'd make a quick change, ministerial change or otherwise. We could do a wholesale change. I think I looked at it when preparing this. I think it was adopted in 2001, the purchasing ordinance. So it's been, over 2 decades, I believe, since we've done a wholesale overhaul. Not that it needs one necessarily. I think things are working pretty well because it's a roadmap. But there might be some tweaks in there that we could look at as far as like competitive bidding and request for proposals and sole source and cooperative. But most of it works. I mean, we're doing cooperative purchasing. We're doing sole source purchasing. So I don't know that there's any wholesale changes that need to be made. It was a pretty good map when it was written back in that time period. But that's where it's at, the limitation on purchasing. So just to bring it all back full circle, budget says this is how much we think or we're willing to spend at this point in time. We can change the budget. We can amend the budget. But this is how much we're willing to spend at this point in time for this purpose, this function, this thing that's in this document we call a budget. And we have appropriated the funds. We're appropriating, we are allocating, we are allowing those funds to be used for this thing or this purpose that in the line that it fits in. But by ordinance, if it's a big purchase, a big expense, it's going to come before you to decide if, even though we said you have the money and we're going to spend it in this category, maybe that thing isn't the wisest of choices, and we'd rather postpone that to next year so we still have that $8,000 for something else this year that may be coming up on the radar in the future. So whatever the reasoning, that's your discretion at that point to make those decisions on purchases that exceed the threshold.
I have a question about that.
Yes.
Let's say that one of our lift station pumps goes down and the cost is $30,000 and we are having a flood. Would we have to have a special council meeting to approve that, or is that an exception to this rule that in an emergency situation?
Purchasing ordinance allows for emergency purchases and
Okay.
emergency
Wanted to
expenditures
make sure.
beyond the $7,500, yes. She does have to bring it back to you to ratify later, or to explain it to you, and hopefully you'll ratify it later. But yeah, emergencies are emergencies, and they need to get handled, and that's what the administrative branch, the executive branch does.
Want to make sure everybody,
Yep.
that's what my understanding was, and I've seen that in other places.
Yep, for sure. As I note on here, budgets are guidelines. They are not set in stone as far as the amounts. They are at that moment in time, but budget amendments are very common as expenditures arise and, things rise and fall, income, taxes, revenues, water bill payments, all that rises and falls over the course of a year. Budget amendments are common. They're okay. They're allowed. They aren't shady. They aren't, we're not robbing Peter to pay Paul. There are going to be plenty of times when you budgeted $1 million for this, you just don't need to use it that year. So when you get to January or March or even June, well, we ended up needing it over here. So we'll take 500 out of that million that we budgeted for, and we'll put the 500 over in this category. And when we do the budget for next year, we'll look at that as our guide, but maybe we'll put that 500 back because now we know we're going to use it this coming year, right? It happens all the time. It's very common, and nothing to be scared about or worried about or feel like you're doing something wrong. That being said, you're going to hear it come up quite often when you're making decisions on expenditures. Did we budget for this? Right? You're just going to hear that. That's a very common question from any council person or any member of the public. Did we already budget for this? Sometimes I wonder, especially when it's coming from the public, do they think that means we already approved it? And I think there's that differentiation. If we budgeted for it, that just means that we allowed for the possibility of spending money for this department or this function. It doesn't mean that the actual act was already approved necessarily, like buying a fire truck, right? Doesn't mean that because we allocated $1 million to fire operations, that $1 million was for a fire truck. It just means that that's how much we think we're going to spend for fire operations that year. So I think it's always good to just try to use plain English and explain that the budget is just what we think we're going to need to spend in that area for that thing for that year. And it's flexible, it can always be amended, but of course, we want to make sure it balances out with what we think revenues are going to be, so we aren't overextending ourselves. And if we do overextend ourselves, we're going to make a lot of adjustments during the year to get it all to balance out so that we haven't approved spending money that we don't have. But beyond that, the only other caveat or point I would make is appropriations of money require 5 votes under the charter. That's one of those 5-vote nuances in our charter. There's a few other things, like I said, vacating of public streets. 5 votes is important because it really means that a supermajority of the council needs to come together on how to budget for things. And it reminds me a lot of the legislative process, just in terms of, I want this. Well, I want this. Well, we're going to have a meeting of the minds. Maybe I'll give you that if you give me that, and kind of get the 5 people that say, this is a good budget. This is sound. This is good for the city of Fraser. And we're going to go ahead with it. When we run into those roadblocks, though, that's when we need more time. And so sometimes the third Monday in May comes up very fast. And I know in the past we've had special meetings and extra meetings just to make sure we get through the process, because it is a process, right? And we want to make sure everybody up here is comfortable with what's in front of them. And we want to make sure that the T's have been crossed and the I's have been dotted too. We want to make sure there aren't any mistakes. And more sets of eyes is how we ensure that. So beyond that, just some food for thought on this topic, and then I'll turn it over to Elaine if she wants to correct anything I said. But much like Congress, the local city council holds the purse strings, right? That's the legislative duty, is to set the financial expenditures that the administration carries out. When the money purse is open, though, administration may spend. That's why it's an appropriation of money, but council still sets the rules on how and the ways and the limits on spending. Budgets are complicated. They set the maximum that may be spent, but they don't mandate that even a penny be spent. Flip side of that is you can budget 0 for something, And that just means we're not going to have that something this year. That's okay too. And then as a part of that whole process, we always have a fee schedule. And I always like to remind everybody, and I know the administration's all over it, but for your purposes, part of budgeting is the fee schedule for the upcoming year. Most communities look at their fees, try to figure out if they're in the right ballpark for whatever it may be. The ones I always think of are like, providing a DVD from the police department on a traffic stop video or something. What is the right fee for that kind of thing? And if inflation dictates, or if cost of personnel, cost of product, if all of that dictates a different fee, we should get a different fee set. And that's part of the departmental side of this, is they're supposed to have input into that, into what they think the fees should be and what they should look like. Keep in mind that fees cannot be profit centers under the law and under the Attorney General opinions on it. And I agree, whether it's Attorney General or not, they are not meant to raise revenue. They are meant to recover taxpayer costs. So rather than the taxpayers absorbing the cost of providing the traffic stop video to somebody who's in trouble, the fee is designed to recover that cost for the taxpayers so that it's an even Steven thing. Doesn't have to be exact. Attorney General has said it just has to be a reasonable approximation based on, some financial estimates by your professionals. But as long as you can defend it, then that's how we set our fees. And we
Can't
have
charge $1,000 for a DVD.
You cannot.
Because it does not cost you $1,000.
Doesn't pass the smell test. That's right. So even when you add in, employee salary, hourly, fringe benefits, cost of material, even when you add all that up, if the average DVD takes 3 hours of time at, let's just say $40 an hour with all those things, fringes and everything, that's what the fee should approximate to for that DVD, if that's the range you want to use. And then beyond that, I put a little chart on there from the New Jersey League of Municipalities, kind of like their version of the MML, showing how the municipal budgeting process works. And that's where I end, because that's the end of the legal side of budgeting. And if Elaine has any practical stuff for you, I'm done.
Well, I got a quick question. So in the budgeting process, though, it's not a balanced budget process, correct? Because some years you might have more expenditures coming up for infrastructure projects, so you actually might run a deficit from the taxes you're bringing in, and then other years you might be running a surplus if you don't have as many expenses, correct? It's not a
100% true. And when you make the decision to have more expenditures than revenues in the budget, doesn't mean it's going to happen. But you've made that decision knowing you're going to dip into what's called the fund balance. Yes, fund balance. And of course, if you ask any of the professionals in the accounting worlds and the auditing worlds, there are certain percentages of fund balance. Now, the nice technical term, right, that you kind of have to look up. But fund balance is sort of money on hand at the end of your fiscal year. So if let's just use $10 million as an example. You anticipate, or you have on June 30th, $10 million in the bank, in the accounts. When you set the next budget, if the budget is for spending $11 million, you've made a conscious decision that you're going to dip into $1 million of that fund balance, that $10 million, just to make sure that you can cover the things you think need to be done that year. Fund balance, I think different professionals have different ideas for what it should be. I've heard, cities and schools can differ, but I think somewhere around 15% seems to be maybe the professional opinion on what it should look like in terms of a reserve. Because a rainy day fund like that, if all of your revenues dried up tomorrow, they always give the analogy of how long could you keep the lights on and run city government. And with the right fund balance, it's usually about a month. So it's an expensive operation. But again, I don't know what ours is right now, or where we're at, or where we keep it at. But I think anywhere between 5 and 25%, at least we've got something there.
Well, that's for a school district.
Yeah.
The city, our target's what 25% has been, and it's also the size of the organization.
It always, but that's why it's a percentage.
I work for an authority. The fund balance right now is 150%, but it's only, but it's only a $1 million. It's an $800,000 a year operation of a sewer authority, so they might need $1 million to fix something. So that's so it's the size of the organization and the type of organization, and so it varies.
Yep. But when I say percentage, obviously what we mean is the amount of money in that fund balance is a percentage of what your overall budgeted expenditures look like for the year.
Operational expenditures.
Your operational
Water is
expenditures.
like 3 months or so.
Yep.
3 months-ish because
Yep.
of collections.
Just to keep us going.
Yep.
I'm out.
So I guess some things to add to that. First and foremost, one of the things that I enacted since I've been here is an agenda request form. And on that agenda request form for each item, we do have details about the budget. I require department heads to make sure that they put what line item it's going to come out of from the budget, if it has been budgeted, if it requires a budget amendment. So that makes things really easy from your perspective. Really, at a glance, you know the details and what's going on with that. Talking about the budget, so I'll be kicking that off later this month with department heads and sending out my budget worksheets to department heads. It'll be their responsibility to take a look at expenditures that they've had historically, what has any type of contracts with reoccurring charges that they're going to have to make sure that they include in their budget line items. There's a lot of stuff behind the scenes. When you get my draft budget for your consideration, the things that you're really going to want to focus on are the things that are negotiable items. There's a lot of stuff in the budget that is not negotiable. You can't really negotiate your rates for your electricity, water, anything like that. Your contracted rates for unions are all set, Social Security, all that kind of stuff is set. There are a lot of things that are already set. So the things that you would primarily want to focus on are capital type items that are in there, any type of changes to non-union employees, so any type of wage increases that I would be recommending. Those are the things that really you would want to focus on. There's so much stuff going on in the budget that is really out of your control because it is contractual. And then as far as talking about kind of a balanced budget, I think a lot of people kind of get lost in the term and confused when we start dipping into fund balance that, oh, you know, that's against the law. We have, you know, a negative balance. Well, as long as you have fund balance and you're using that, it's fine. It's when you have a budget that not only is going to be using all of your proposed revenue, but also exhausting more than your fund balance. That is what you are legally not allowed to do. So other than that, I don't really have anything else to add. Certainly, we'll be working through this process, and there will be a schedule coming to you for approval soon for the schedule for approving the budget process, the special meetings. I'll likely be working with the mayor on kind of figuring that schedule out and getting something proposed for approval for council as a whole.
Okay, very good. Is that it? Is that all?
That's it.
There's a lot to absorb. Questions?
I just was going to say something that I do. It's more like procedural stuff. So, because we didn't talk about like our council rules. And you two are the recipients of it. You don't even know that I do this. But what I do, like when I want to add something to the agenda, it's just advice. What I always do, I send it to the city manager and I send it to the mayor and the mayor pro tem. Since any of us can, I'm going to probably wrongly state the rule, but any of us can ask for something to be put on the agenda because we clarified the rule in 2021. It used to be very convoluted. You had to have two and it's blah. But I just, out of courtesy, that's just how I did it. And so that's why when you get my emails, like, it just, that way you know what I'm wanting and I'm directing the city manager because she creates it and I'm not violating Open Meetings Act. So I'm not excluding, but that's just a tip that I've done that I think works well.
Best practice.
And you can also tell anyone else that you're asking for that. but-
100%, yeah. But just so that you guys know, like if I haven't seen you or communicated with you, my life's just been crazy, so I just wanted to let you know why I did send you that email.
That's fine, that's great.
That is what I will
Figured
do.
that was why, but yeah.
Yeah, the rule's been since, that agenda rule has changed over the years, and it's been, it was 3 members.
Yep.
And then it became 1, one person can ask.
Yeah.
And it used to be, there was a time when 3 could ask to have it removed, an item removed, and we took care of that. That was, you can't have the minority asking for something to be removed before a meeting. That's what the meeting is for, to approve or
Right.
adjust the agenda. So, any questions? Mr. Perry? Mr. Odell? Nope. Mayor Pro Tem? None. Sorry. Councilmember Perry. Mayor Pro Tem Sutherland. Councilmember Baranski. Councilmember Stang. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion made by Councilmember Baranski, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Sutherland to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you very much.
All you.
That was good.